If you're reading a list of foundational studios in the realm of anime and manga, you'd be hard-pressed not to find Tatsunoko Productions. Tatsunoko's ability to innovate, reinvent, and, important for TV anime, produce quality programming within tight deadlines made them a mainstay in the industry. Not a consistent mainstay, mind you, they had their ups and downs like anyone else, but we'll put a pin in that for now. At inception, Tatsunoko carved itself an important place in anime history by breaking away from the mold of other anime studios of the era. Led by manga author Tatsuo Yoshida, Tatsunoko became a studio about freedom of expression for animators and collaboration between them. Now, I feel the general image people have when you bring up Tatsunoko, especially in the West, is their superhero lineup. I'd imagine a majority of my viewers first took notice of them from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, others saw their 90s OVA incarnations, and there's a few old dudes in the back who watched Speed Racer and Battle of the Planets on TV as a kid. If you're the last one, then hi dad, hope you're not too disappointed. These anime heroes, as well as the tokusatsu shows at the time like Kamen Rider, laid the groundwork for the typical Japanese henshin hero tropes. With that said, today I want to talk about my favorite in their hero lineup. The neo-human Kashan. In his original incarnation, he's a man turned into a robot to save the world from an evil android threat. A hero with immortal powers transcending those possible by man. Powers he needs to hide because of its grim implications. A character whose stories normally end up chasing trends while also putting forth ideas ahead of its time. Someone thrust into a war with humanity on the line against his will, a battle that no one else has the power to end. If Kashan won't do it, then who will? Over the past half a century, Kashan has had 4 different iterations. The original 35-episode 1973 TV anime, a 4-episode OVA in the 90s, a peculiar live-action film in 2004, and finally the 2008 reboot series Casshern Sins. I want to trace how each iteration of this character and his world evolved, the themes that they all share, how the context of the world and anime industry affected them, and finally, the legacy of Kashan. Before deciding to make this video, I had only seen Sins, and by God, did this change the way I look at the entire series. However, to get there, we need to go back. And I mean really far back. Alright, I know most of my audience is gamer guys and gals, meaning I kind of feel like I should go over a lot of anime history here. Kashan came out very early in the TV anime timeline, so there's tangentially related information from the start I want to touch on. If you're an anime historian or anything, you can skip forward a tiny bit. I'm probably not going to say anything you haven't heard before. Primarily, I want to introduce the 2 main anime studios before Tatsunoko hit the scene, Toei Animation and Osamu Tezuka's Mushi Productions. To stress, there were other studios throughout this initial time span I'm observing, but none all that relevant to today. First up, Toei Animation's early days. Going back even more, Japan during World War II and the Reconstruction era didn't have a big animation scene, which I'd figure doesn't shock anyone. Americans were revolutionizing the medium pre-war and during the war when importing American products to Japan happened to be not that kind of very legal, meaning unless you were a Japanese propaganda animator smuggling in Fantasia, you had no clue what exactly the Americans were getting. Because of that, as well as the more pressing economic and social problems in Japan, animation didn't grow much in their Reconstruction era. You mainly had short animations played in theaters and propaganda pieces. That came to a change when Toei, a film company owned by a railway CEO, bought a small animation studio named Nihon Doga Eiga, which he renamed to Toei Doga. At this point, he decided they were going to produce a feature-length film once a year and nothing else. For the animators themselves, this was kind of cool. They were still on salary when a film wasn't ready for production, giving them time to work on short films of their own and train newbies. In fact, the training process became so well known that animators at the time would even jokingly call it Toei Doga University, in reference to the speed at which fledgling cartoonists became full-fledged animators on staff. Remember that one for later. These 2 aspects, as well as perhaps more importantly the lack of real competition, made Toei Doga the desired studio for Japanese animators during the late 50s and early 60s. I mean, working there sounds just about perfect. Unless you have the basic financial knowledge to see the problem with producing 1 film a year and paying an ever-growing staff to essentially do whatever they want. However, Toei's financial problems from up top isn't necessarily relevant today. Instead, it's at the bottom where some employees didn't get paid their due worth, leading to a union strike, a few unhappy animators, and a certain competition to swoop in there. Now, I don't think I need to introduce Osamu Tezuka that much. He created Astro Boy, Jungle Emperor, Metropolis, lots of manga that are important to the formation of the medium in its modern form, and especially the aspects of it that transferred over to anime. I digress. Throughout the 1950s, Tezuka had a manga series running titled My Son Goku, a parody of Journey to the West that followed Sun Wukong and Sun Zhang's exploits. though obviously with their Japanese names Son Goku, Priest Sanzo, and so on. I can't say how accurate it is to the original Chinese novel because my Son Goku isn't in English and I've just started reading Journey to the West, which is really long when translated to English, but it looks like it follows the most basic of basic outlines of the original epic. Now the reason that's important is because Toei wanted to make a film loosely based on Tezuka's My Son Goku manga with Tezuka involved in some fashion, an idea Tezuka was of course excited for. Anyone who's done basic Tezuka research knows that he really wanted to copy the success Disney had, and getting a chance at animation was a good first step. Now Tezuka, coming purely from the static image manga background, didn't work too well with Toei. He ended up only making a storyboard that the Toei team said would work better in a manga form. However, the animators found Tezuka's simplistic art style of chibi characters, round heads, and distinctive facial features easier to animate than their previous films that relied a lot on rotoscoping. Which leads to the next part, Tezuka's first animation studio, Mushi Productions. While Tezuka didn't stay with Toei for long, he did make connections with a few animators. Animators who you might recall were bearing some qualms with the payments from Toei, while Tezuka had no clue what he should be paying animators. Because of that, Tezuka gave his animators almost triple the amount Toei did. Cool for employees, though in retrospect it's probably a big contribution to the company's bankruptcy later. So skipping the middle bits because I'm losing relevance, Tezuka and his team at Mushi Productions got Tetsuo and Atom onto Japanese airwaves. Or for us swag-ass Americans, Astro Boy on local broadcast networks. The first fully animated Japanese television series that ran for a full-length programming block at a regular time of the week meant specifically for Japanese television. For simplicity's sake, we're just gonna call it the first TV anime series. You can learn about the asterisks on your own. Astro changed the world of Japanese animation practically overnight, inspiring many studios to get their own anime series so that kids would beg their parents for toys.
Oh, Father, how can you say?
Having set the stage with those two companies, we can get to the actually important guys today. In 1932, Tatsuo Yoshida was born in Kyoto, the oldest of three brothers, with the middle brother, Kenji, born in 1935, and his second brother, Toyoharu, in 1940, though the younger brother is more popular by his pseudonym, Ippei Kyori. If those years of birth make you worried when juxtaposed to world history, then yeah, it kinda should. World War II happened during their childhood, and their parents died not long after the war. That meant the three of them had to figure out a way to make ends meet during the American occupation of Japan, and I assume Tatsuo felt the most responsible as the eldest sibling. During that period is when Tatsuo would get his biggest inspiration for art. For their amusement, American soldiers stationed in Japan imported American comic books. And in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s as well, the most popular comics were Superman and Action Comics. Comics the soldiers shared with the Yoshida brothers. The colorful art and stories by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster is what partially inspired the three brothers to practice drawing comics. Tatsuo's first job in the early 50s was making the illustrations for two newspapers, Kyoto Shinbun in Kyoto and Miyako Shinbun in Nagoya. From what I can tell, he mostly just drew advertisements for local happenings. I figure it paid the bills, but not anything super amazing. As a local illustrator hitting his glass ceiling in Kyoto, Tatsuo decided to move to Tokyo in 1954 since that's where manga was popping off. In Tokyo, Tatsuo met Ikki Kajiwara, the eventual creator of Tomorrow's Joe, and illustrated multiple martial arts stories he wrote, most notably Iron Arm Rikia, and I know it's the most notable one because it's the only series that consistently credits to him online. In the few images I can find, we see Yoshida developed what would later be considered his art style. Realistic proportions, athletic action scenes, very black eyes, clearly inspired by his love for American comics with a Japanese flair added instinctively. And because of that style, it's probably not too surprising if I announce that Yoshida drew the Japanese Superman comic translations for a few years. And I say drew because these weren't simple translations. Tatsuo carefully imitated the Superman house style DC had to redraw many stories with new panels or reordered ones and even expand on the action. And what I think is important to mention for later context is Superman leaned very heavily into the sci-fi elements around this period. Pretty much every other issue, Superman would have some crazy sci-fi thing happen. In part because the American Comics Code made writers come up with the darndest shit in the 1950s, which Yoshida must have seen a handful of when he was localizing it for the Japanese audience. Moving on, once he had lived in Tokyo for a while, he was able to convince his brothers, also now illustrators, to follow him to Tokyo, leading to the formation of Tatsunoko Productions in October of 1962 with the three brothers and a few assistants, a company they proudly wanted for making manga and nothing else. At least, that was their plan. Tatsuo was content with just publishing manga. He earned enough to get by, the company gave him and his colleagues both insurance and IP rights, and his stories were loved by kids and adults across Japan. However, on New Year's Day 1963, Tezuka released Astro Boy to the resounding success I talked about earlier. And Astro Boy's shockwave didn't go unfelt within Tatsunoko, which is where a close friend of Tatsuo Yoshida comes in, Hiroshi Sasagawa. If there is one single person to credit for Tatsunoko going into animation, it's him. Quick backstory, when Sasagawa was younger, he sent letters and manga to Osamu Tezuka. The manga impressed Tezuka, leading to him bringing Sasagawa on as his lead manga assistant in 1957, meaning he helped with some of what we've already gone over like Astro Boy and Mai Son Goku. Now by the time Mushi Pro opened up, Sasagawa had already gone freelance with his own work. He still helped Tezuka a bit here and there while also growing a friendship with the Yoshidas. And after helping out a very tiny uncredited amount on Astro Boy, Sasagawa got interested in making anime. He brought the idea up to Tatsuo and the other mangaka at the Tatsunoko office, and they were not really into the idea. According to Sasagawa, it took a lot of work to convince anyone to jump on the idea. And even once he did convince Tatsuo, he didn't stand up, have a eureka moment and shout, "We're an anime company now." He just went along with it. The main problem they ran into is no one knew what to do. As we saw with Tezuka on the Mai Son Goku adaptation, manga work doesn't directly translate to animation, and besides that little bit Sasagawa did on Astro, they collectively knew nothing about it. Luckily, there was a short period of time where Tatsunoko was in talks with Toei about producing an anime series. So Sasagawa, the mad lad, went to Toei Doga, got hired under the idea he'd be a bridge between the two companies. The plan with Toei fell through. He still went through their entire training process to learn how animation works, and then left to go back to Tatsunoko. You'd have to be fucking crazy to go through with this today, and also, it's a little insane to me that Toei didn't have some kind of contract to ensure he worked for them afterwards. I mean, it's a different era. I'm sure there's something I'm missing about this. Toei was at the top. They didn't need to worry about competition besides Tezuka. Anyway, the anime that Toei was initially primed to produce was called Space Ace. It had a story and art style reminiscent of Astro Boy, so they tried to sell it blatantly as, "This can be your Astro Boy." I'm unsure what exactly caused it, but Toei pulled out and the Tatsunoko team had to figure it out themselves. Yoshida already began publishing a manga version of the story, so not making the anime would be pretty embarrassing. Which is why it's a good thing Sasagawa got that training, because now they had to make Uchu Ace in-house, and it's alright. It's an anime of its era, and it's okay, but I personally don't think it's indicative of Tatsuo Yoshida's art. It's clearly trying to copy Astro Boy with the classic Disney style and outlandish situations. However, underneath that, you can somewhat see Yoshida's desire to make a series reminiscent of American superhero comics. For one, the star of the series, Ace, comes from a planet far away and has superpowers on Earth in a style comparable to Superman. Additionally, the stories of the few individual episodes I watched, keep in mind not many are in English, also give me vibes of Silver Age Superman with how Ace is a mostly unstoppable force of good traveling far distances quickly. I admit this is a comparison I'm digging a tad bit for, yet one I think important when getting to the real Tatsunoko style. Whether you consider it a good representation of Tatsunoko's work or not, the important thing is that Space Ace got the company into animation. And given that there was only 3 or 4 other studios producing TV animation, it was a pretty big deal. Though not as big a deal as their next series. After Space Ace's conclusion, Tatsunoko began working on their second anime. And this is definitely what shaped Tatsunoko's most recognizable line, their sci-fi heroes. An anime taking from Tatsuo's earlier manga Pilot Ace, Mach Go Go Go, or as known globally, Speed Racer, was Tatsunoko's first hero show with the realistic art and style that most people connect to Tatsuo Yoshida's artwork. Speed has a normal-looking body, the pudgy Tatsuo face, and his actions are not too far exaggerated by what's possible of an athlete that jumps in a volcano. Again, a majority of TV anime followed Tezuka's cartoonish designs that he touted as good for limited animation to get work done quickly. While Speed Racer, I'd say, is the first TV anime to do a realistic style well. I mean, it still cuts corners, it's a TV anime, and I think the reputation of reaction faces and speed lines precede it. But the detailed characters, and not to mention vibrant use of color, made Speed one of the harder series to make of its time. Additionally, Tatsuo, likely due to his background of loving American American comics and culture, really wanted Speed Racer to appeal to audiences across both Japan and America. Even Speed's outfit consisting of red, white, and blue, and the Mach 5 having the wheel on the left side is probably a reflection of his desire to get Americans interested, and boy did that work. Speed did alright in Japan, but in America, it was a hit. Speed Racer, more than any anime I can think of, defined American perceptions of anime. Ask a random non-anime fan over 40 what anime looks like, and they'll probably describe something close to Speed Racer. Hell, even my parents know what Speed Racer is. They've probably watched it more than I have. And as far as first impressions of Japanese animation, Speed Racer isn't really a bad one. It has sci-fi elements in the car's ludicrous technology and designs, long-lasting plot threads with consequences across the series, a force of good in Speed, and even a strong female lead in Trixie. All of these, to some extent, would continue throughout Tatsunoko's work, debatably to now, and that's thanks to the hard work of Tatsunoko's staff and Tatsuo's guidance. Like, you might be able to guess this, animating Speed Racer required a lot of hard work compared to contemporary anime. And from what it seems, Tatsunoko didn't have a lot of money going into it. Yet across the board, any interview I've seen about working at Tatsunoko is that Tatsuo was one of the most passionate bosses to work with. Tatsuo's artwork was harder to work with than Tezuka's, but most of the team had a dedication to making his images move, in part due to the direct creator involvement he supplied. Tatsunoko created the groundwork for sci-fi heroes, and that's the style that will evolve into Kashan. Before getting to it, there's a few footnotes to go over about their work between Speed Racer and Kashan. Like most successful companies, Tatsunoko expanded over time with a higher output of projects per year that involved more house staff, as well as a bit of Korean outsourcing. And it was a quite varied output at that. Like I said at the start, the sci-fi heroes are what we usually associate as Tatsunoko's house style, but I don't want to paint that as their sole crop. In fact, there's quite a few dramatic and comedic shows important to the studio's growth that impacted Kashan. First of all, because it's the least relevant today, there's their comedy line. Tatsunoko produced quite a few of these, with Sasagawa usually taking more control on them, while the Yoshidas had varying degrees of involvement. According to Sasagawa, making these alongside his work on the serious shows kinda helped with balancing out his interests. He could have Speed race down the fast runway one week while getting to draw a Fat Godzilla parody being Goofy the next one. Now, if only he could mesh those together someday. The comedy shows aren't super relevant to Kashan since it's a dark series, though it's something I want y'all to keep in mind when we get to that history part 2 down there. Now, the important Tatsunoko line is, surprisingly, their fantasy anime. This included an award winner like Hutch the Honeybee that told an original story of an orphaned honeybee trying to reunite with his queen, a touching story that earned reruns over 50 times in Japan. And they also made a Pinocchio adaptation, where Pinocchio tried to kill his friend for his heart.
Do you mean to say you'd stoop that low to become a real human being? You bet I would, and you're not gonna stop me!
When it comes to animation, particularly on Hutch and Pinocchio, these were quite fantastical. These showed off the creativity in Tatsunoko with beautiful castles, realistic environmental lighting, and fantasy situations not possible in the comparatively grounded sci-fi hero shows. Despite undoubtedly being a sci-fi hero show, Kashan would go on to take the time slot Tatsunoko reserved for these fantasy series. So I wanted to introduce them now because that slot plays a huge role in every iteration of Kashan. And for the sake of completion, there's the obvious work to mention: Science Ninja Team Gatchaman. In the wake of Japanese henshin heroes like Ultraman and Kamen Rider, Tatsunoko took some of those concepts for their next hero, but this time it was a team. In fact, a team of 5 with the straight-laced leader, the hot-headed second in command, the girl, the comic relief. Hey, wait a minute, I think I know this structure. Yeah, you might think that Gatchaman ripped off Super Sentai, when actually this predates it by about 3 years. After Kamen Rider came out, henshin heroes blew up. So making a show with 5 of them? That should sell at like Mach 5 speeds. And it did. No question, Gatchaman was Tatsunoko's biggest success, and given the anime climate of today, I doubt they will ever match the popularity they had with it. I've had 3 separate occasions of talking to middle-aged Japanese men that had never brought up anime with me before, and they not only knew what Gatchaman was, they were big fans of it. And if you talk to a middle-aged Japanese man, they're fucking serious, I don't want to talk about cartoons. Gatchaman had a lot of Tatsunoko's most skilled creatives behind it, and attracted even more staff to the company. With a new mix of experienced and fresh staff, Tatsunoko was ready to get to work on their next transforming hero show. Although, Gatchaman got extended for another year, which gets us to the start of Kashan's production. The original series, Shinzo Ningen Kashan, or as I will be translating it, Neo-Human Kashan, went into the planning phase when they thought Gatchaman was close to its conclusion. Kashan should have taken Gatchaman's time slot and likely some of its production crew, but due to the series getting an extra year, it instead took the slot of the fairy tale shows and had a crew that's comparatively less experienced in hero anime, or they were also doubling up on Gatchaman work. The Yoshida brothers still all worked on it, with the younger two credited as producers and Tatsuo creating the initial character design and art. Although of note here is that by this point, Tatsuo worked on the character designs for a lot of their shows, including the fairy tale series, Kashan and Gatchaman, with the young Yoshitaka Amano. Yes, the Final Fantasy Yoshitaka Amano. He joined the company at the young age of 15 and was also a really big fan of Western superheroes. However, Kashan, as we'll see, takes very heavily from the Japanese heroes like Kamen Rider, even more so than Gatchaman. Now, some of the other people that worked on the planning stages would be Sasagawa and a growing Tatsunoko writer, Jinzo Toriumi. He wrote the dramatic martial arts Tatsunoko series Judo Boy, which has a similar melancholic atmosphere that we'll see in Kashan. So we have a series director that spent most of his time making the comedy shows in Sasagawa, the key script writer Jinzo Toriumi that focused on drama, and they ended up with artists and animators from a mix of all their shows, though many of them had no credits prior to Kashan. Kashan also has quite a few episode directors and single episode writers because that's how the freelance market kinda works. Not many subsequent episodes share the same writer and director, and because of that we'll find some episodes that shift gears completely from the prior episode, and others that overlap themes and plot beats even more than usual. Sasagawa or Jinzo would direct/write some back to back, and usually those were the episodes most important to the overarching story. Now, in the context of 1973, when children are watching the show week by week without any home video to rewatch them, it's not that big of a deal if it repeats a few beats. I just figure it's worth mentioning today when everyone always binges shows. Now, of the episode directors, the most notable are probably Yuji Nunokawa for directing almost half of the episodes, and Yoshiyuki Tomino for directing 9 and having some of the most experience on the team since he worked on Astro Boy for a while. But that's enough name dropping for the potential foreshadowing later. Let's get to the actual show itself. Kashan, for a majority of its 35 episodes, consists of one-off episodes that start a plot and resolve it within the 22 minutes. Not much carries over between episodes, with obvious exceptions of a few two-parters, a majority of which happen near the very start and end of the series, which I guess is a good time to go over the premise. Episode 1 and 2 are very dense, so I'm gonna quickly recap and joke about the whole things before giving my thoughts and then go over the rest of the series in general. Kashan opens up on a medieval castle filled with technological doohickeys like robot swans, guns, and the knowledge that this place could only exist through the underappreciated work of serfs. Here lies Dr. Kotaro Azuma, a world-famous authority of robot engineering and probably proper ventilation if he lives in this damp castle. Dr. Azuma has built a state-of-the-art android unlike any known before, known as BK-1. Azuma plans for BK-1 to solve the world's pollution problems and uses a superior set of leadership skills instilled in him to get a new Blue Man group going. At least that's what it looks like. However, before he's finished and released to the world, lightning strikes the castle, thus rewiring his electronic brain to give him will. It causes BK-1 to rampage through the castle, awakening Dr. Azuma, his wife Midori, their son Tetsuya, and their dog Lucky.
Oh, fuck!
Despite the rule where robots must obey humans, BK-1 is attacking those that created him. In a hurry, the Azuma family flee their home so they can call the unstoppable military. With his firm control over the situation, BK-1 returns to the castle, releases the other androids to be his generals, uses Dr. Azuma's resources to build robots he commands, renames himself Breaking Boss, and begins his new army known as Androforce, a robot army with the purpose of making humans subservient to robots, with androids that immediately take control of a significant portion of the world. Giving us our setup where the androids want to capture the Azuma family, society hates the Azumas for creating Breaking Boss, and they have nowhere to go, besides the nicely furnished and ventilated National Science Research Center that they stay in. Dr. Azuma and Tetsuya use this time in the center to find a way to make a robot that can stop Breaking Boss without any risks of it turning back on them, something they sadly can't figure out with their current skill set. After the commercial break, we're introduced to Tetsuya's childhood friend Luna. She'll have a proper introduction later, but for now she's observing her whole life getting torn apart by Androforce robots wreaking havoc, which due to her life as a woman in a young boy's cartoon, she needs to get saved by a big, strong... Dougie. Lucky gets there right in the nick of time to stop the robots, but dies in the process. In her sadness, Luna takes Lucky back to Tetsuya, and that's when Dr. Ozma does something wild. Since Lucky fought valiantly and stuck by Tetsuya as his best friend, Dr. Ozma revives him as an ultra-powerful robotic dog, renamed Friender, which in turn gives Tetsuya an idea: turn himself into a powerful android to stop Breaking Boss and Androforce. Dr. Ozma doesn't doubt Tetsuya's ability if given the android body, but has one major hang-up. If turned into an android, his son can never turn back into a human. He'd become a robot in an era when society fears them. It's a scary thought that he only turns around to when seeing his son's unwavering resolve to save humanity and maybe maintain his own, no matter the cost. After giving a goodbye to his parents, perhaps the last as a human, Tetsuya enters the science pod and comes out as Kashan, the Neo-Human. From now on, his primary goal is to adventure forth with Friender to stop Androforce and save humanity with his new power, while hiding his mechanic identity from those he's sworn to protect. Only Kashan, with his android powers and human heart, can save the world. As the narrator says at the end of every episode, if not Kashan, then who will? The rest of episodes 1 and 2 finishes the setups, and I'll go over that quickly because it's not as important. First of all, Breaking Boss and Androforce attack the research center with the plan of capturing the family, meaning big action beat where we start seeing Kashan and Friender's abilities, which happen to be pretty darn powerful. But since they're not used to it, they end up losing with his parents getting captured and a to-be-continued popping up while he's in the clutches of a large robot. Episode 2 begins with the robot blowing up and Kashan being completely fine afterward. The rest of the episode is Kashan attempting to save his parents from Breaking Boss. So he saves some civilians, meets one of the AF generals, and then falls down because he runs out of energy. Yeah, Kashan is solar powered, we'll get back to that. Breaking Boss thinks they killed him, so he uses that as well as Midori's life as a threat to make Dr. Ozma work for him. Now Dr. Ozma knows Kashan is alive because his robots are tough shit, but that actually gives him more reason to work for Breaking Boss. If he works for BB, he can help Kashan from the inside. His wife is still a problem though, so yet again he does something crazy. Dr. Ozma hides his wife's mind and body inside of the robot swan named Swanee we saw in episode 1 for like 2 shots. This allows Midori to hide as a spy for Kashan since Breaking Boss has adopted Swanee as his new favorite pet. They never explain the science on this, let's just count that as a fantasy thing. Anyways, Kashan runs into the castle, finds that Breaking Boss has already transported his father to a new location, and meets up with Mommy in Swanee form, who, as long as is in this form, she can only communicate with Kashan during a full moon. A sad fate, because not only can Kashan only see his mother once a month, she can only relay her insider information when the moon is just right. Or when the 1970s children's TV show writers deem it necessary. With another action scene and Kashan escaping Breaking Boss's castle with no parents, that's where episode 2 ends. A lot less dense than episode 1, so let's go ahead and analyze both. Now, as you may have noticed already, Kashan has a strange mix of theming already. The main 3 genres we can say it follows are superhero, sci-fi, and fantasy. As I've already gone over, mixing superhero and sci-fi isn't anything new for Western cape heroes, Japanese transforming heroes, or even Tatsunoko themselves. Where Kashan goes differently is the implementation of fantasy elements. In fact, I'd say it's more of a superhero fantasy with robots and science thrown on top of it. Plus a lot of melodrama. Like, for every version of this show, just think that there's 5 fucking layers of it. Let's go over these one at a time. Kashan's main sci-fi element is the robots and androids in the series, particularly the way in which technology conflicts with man. With every new advancement in technology, a proportion of the population gets a bit weary of what it may entail. A lot of these fears people think are pretty silly these days. Video games influence you to steal cars, cartoons whisper arson messages to children, and dishwashers make my butler Sebastian more lazy. But there are some with good reason to fear. 2 I can think of in Japan during the 1970s were atomic weapons, since they had just rebuilt after 2 of those bombed them, and factories that emitted a lot of toxic fumes. And if we were to look at America, there's stuff like credit cards that were getting popular around then. I mean, the idea of those even scares me today when you think about it, like a card you can use to buy stuff with money you might not have? Yeah, good thing they invented debit cards to combat that. Oh shit, that's another technology! wait, but money is also a man-made thing. So we're just in a loop of humans inventing stuff to combat our other creations, and now let's wrap that back to Kashan. Every force in the series is created by man with the purpose of combating another force that man could not control. Dr. Ozma created Breaking Boss to deal with pollution that man caused, and Kashan is meant to stop Breaking Boss, which man caused. It's a loop of first technology versus second technology, fueled by a conflict of man versus technology. So let's delve into Breaking Boss to explain this better. Breaking Boss was created by Dr. Ozma with the purpose of improving an issue caused by man, pollution, a long-term problem caused by man's short-sighted idea to use fossil fuels to give us the energy needed for the energy we need for our day-to-day life. And like that, Breaking Boss is a short-sighted solution that causes a major problem. I mean, sort of. Like, yeah, Dr. Ozma did not plan on Breaking Boss to attack humans. The lightning is what causes him to turn evil, not anything he put in. But in what realm does a pollution-solving robot need a fucking mouth laser? Moving on, Breaking Boss obviously took some pages out of Frankenstein. And similar to some iterations of the monster, Breaking Boss picks up habits of humans to imitate them. I'd say his human aspects show most obviously in his demeanor. Breaking Boss, after living for just a bit, immediately aims for conquest. Humans have wronged Breaking Boss, and because of that, he thinks he's owed something. But what he's owed also means forcing robots to help him, and anyone that doesn't listen, man or machine, is subject to dismissal. So I don't know if he's too good at this whole freedom thing. Then, despite being a robot born without clothes and the lack of societal standards demanding he cloth up, he slips himself into a general's garb, because according to his mind database, dictators like Mussolini took over Italy with a funny garb on and nothing bad happened to him, so might as well try it too. In addition to that, Breaking Boss picks up leisurely human activities. Usually we get a cut to him partaking in one-on episodes they don't know how to introduce BB, and it's most of the comedic parts of Kashan. Yeah, despite comedic man Sasagawa helming as a series director, Kashan strays away from humor aside from these bits. A few of my favorite of these scenes include him trying on Japanese kimonos with andro women next to him, golfing, and getting a massage. And what makes it work is that he's under this belief that upper-class organisms take part in these luxuries, while he still gets something wrong. He cheats at golf, he can't properly fit into the kimono, or just the fact that since he's a robot, he does not need a massage. Small little things that make Robot Hitler #relatable. It gives its experimentation with luxuries a sense of irony since he fights to liberate machines from humans, while every other machine is left out of the luxuries he receives. Just like humans, Breaking Boss has allowed power to corrupt him. We see his rage and power the most in how he treats his three generals, Akuban, Badashin, and Sagure. At least one of the three are in every episode, usually Akuban and Badashin, and you can boil them down to lanky guy who tries his best, small scheming meanie, and big idiot. Almost like Ed, Edd, and Eddy. They're the one normally leading armies against Kashan, which means it's their fuck-ups that Breaking Boss rips them a new one over. And these parts aren't normally played for laughs. Breaking Boss's strong power, commanding energy, and terrifyingly simple understanding of human culture makes him one of my favorite villains in Tatsunoko. Only rivaled by the Doronbo gang, but you can't beat them. We'll talk about him again later because he's in the background for most of the series. Let's talk about who he's trying to break the most. Our hero, Kashan. Kashan, as I've already said, is a hero influenced heavily by Kamen Rider, to the point where it was almost titled Neo Roider before someone stepped in and said, dude, let's be a little more original about this, resulting in the name Kashan, which, according to an unsourced comment on the Japanese Wikipedia page, Sasagawa thought of this as the sound of glass breaking. Tetsuya broke his human life to fight Breaking Boss as an android, and he can't go back to that life. Just like how a broken glass can never be repaired completely. Throughout the series, we see Kashan have not exactly regret, but a dissatisfaction with becoming a robot. Every episode, he goes to save someone from the terrors of Androforce, but he has to keep who he is a secret. Even when humans are antagonizing Friender, his faithful robot companion, he needs to make it seem like he's still just a really strong human. And I'll admit, this gets a little funny at a few points. For example, episode 7, a really good episode. There's a scene where a little boy is fighting about whether Kashan is human. So Kashan takes an apple he has and says robots can't eat food, right? And proves he's a human by eating the apple. Which, fine on its own. But then the fucking narrator comes in to say, Kashan has not eaten since becoming a newly built man. He can't actually taste anything. And then he breaks the apple in anguish. It's some really melodramatic stuff that I honestly can't get enough of. I feel as though this torment that Kashan works through additionally helps to drive the more fantastical elements of the series. It gives Kashan something to yearn for that realistically can't happen. His ball that Cinderella wants to go to, being a human like Pinocchio, a human like Jerry Seinfeld be, but unlike them who live in a fantasy world where a fairy or court judge can magically make their dreams come true, Kashan must deal with the reality that he can't go back to his fleshy body. It's a shitty situation he has to live in that's not fully negative, at least. I mean, first of all, now that he has the white superhero outfit, he can sell toys for Tatsunoko, a clear positive for kids and parents in the upcoming holiday season. And additionally, though a little less important than the toys you can buy, Kashan has become a neo-human with great power. And I mean a lot of power. If there's an android in his way, he easily mows right through them with a single chop or kick, while Frender bites the one next to him, all while looking as elegant as a 70s cartoon can make him. Even with his extreme power, his motions while jumping and attacking appear only a small step above what's capable by a human. You, the viewer, get the idea that with the right training and mindset, you can pull off some of these techniques, while others clearly transcend the limitations of a human, like his drill kick or surviving bullets. Definitely don't try that last one. Speaking of survival, let's talk about Kashan's mortality. Frequently throughout the series, usually when Kashan faces a danger, he'll utter the phrase, "I'm immortal." Whether it's a case of sustaining through hard weather or withstanding a bomb, Kashan has confidence he can survive it. Which brings the question, is he actually immortal? If we're saying someone who will never die by aging, then yeah, he's got that. But then if we're saying someone who can't be, say, decapitated, we don't really know. He absolutely surpasses that capable of humans. He walks through fire, doesn't need to eat, can skip sleeping. His only weakness is that he requires solar energy to function. And as you can guess, that's usually how they get around scenarios where Kashan should clearly win, but the episode needs him to lose. Like back to episode 2, he's inside of Breaking Boss's castle. If he wanted, he could go fight him then and there. Maybe win, who knows, it's still episode 2. But oh shit, Kashan needs more solar energy, and it's nighttime, forcing him to leave while his mom is stuck as a swan and his dad went to ride the hype train. It's a weakness to question his immortality, connect a little to the environmental message they mostly drop, and give the writers an easy out if Kashan has no way to lose a scenario. Because I reiterate, Kashan is seriously OP. He shouldn't be losing. Yeah, that's a line that makes me sound like a Dragon Ball power scaling guy. I am. An episode I think plays with his immortality the best is episode 10. In this episode, Kashan and Frender need to travel through an intense desert with some humans to fix an important oil and gas pipeline. What makes it difficult is that metal deteriorates quickly in this desert, leading Frender to visibly rust and Kashan to catch some weak knees. Obviously they come out fine because it's only episode 10, but it puts Kashan's mortality into question while the rest of the series doesn't really. I feel like Kashan strikes a middle point where his appearance makes him seem human, despite having powers clearly unobtainable by mortals. If you see someone fight like this or, you know, survive being stuck in stone, you should know he's not a human. Yet people still want to believe in him. Humans look to Kashan as a fantastical sign of what man can do. If one human can take down so many Androforce soldiers, then maybe a whole town can as well. If there's no evidence of the contrary, why not keep that beacon of hope? I'll come back to these concepts later. Next, I want to take a break to explain my choice of translation for character names and terms. As I always say when I reach these points of videos, I do not speak or study Japanese. My opinion holds no weight compared to even a second-year Japanese student. So to make sure I don't look like too big of a jackass, I asked a Japanese friend for help, and you can blame him if you disagree with what I have to say. So the only characters with some real contention on how their names should be romanized are Kashan and Frender. And given that they're on the DVD cover, I figure I should talk about that. Frender is a bit easier to decide because everyone's kinda agreed today. In Japanese, he's pronounced more like Frenda. I figure most of y'all know Japan and Korea kind of fuse the R and L noise. Because of that, I've seen his name romanized as both Frender and Flender, which I don't get why people do that second one. This is a dog, man's best friend, not man's best flend. Only a few 1970s toy packages and the yellow subs I watched for a majority of the series use that romanization, and it makes me think of Ned Flanders, so you might get why I'm not going to use that one. The more contentious romanization is Kashan himself. In Japanese, he's pronounced a bit closer to Kashan, with a small Y at the start and a hold on the A. Personally, I think that's the proper way to pronounce it. It's how every character in the original Japanese pronounces it over every series. However, it doesn't really flow right from my English mouth when the rest of the video is in English, so I'm not doing that for 2 hours. Now, the original series never got an English dub or release until way later. It did get a Spanish dub, completely watchable on archive.org, but they renamed it fucking Superboy Galactico, so that's not too helpful. So anyways, he's been called Kashan for the original series, the 90s OVA, OVA sub and dub, most toys, and all the multimedia appearances I've seen in English. Well, they changed it to Casshern in the 2004 feature film and the 2009 series Casshern Sins. Personally, I've gotten more used to Kashan. I feel it's the closest to the original Japanese without sounding weird out of my American glizzy guzzling mouth. But as you'll see, the title and tags probably say Casshern because that's the more popular title in the West, and I don't want this video to tank. I'm also going to refer to the film and Casshern Sins using the "ern" ending, since that's the legally binding spelling for them. Which, while I'm talking about dubs, they didn't do Breaking Boss's name quite right in any. Now maybe I'm off base, but I think the pun of "breaking boss" to mean he breaks stuff comes off pretty clearly. He breaks human spirits, and he's the cause of Kashan, the broken glass noise. English dub of the 90s OVA straight up renamed him Black King, and the Sins dub goes with Brya King Boss. I don't think the Sins interpretation is dreadful, it follows the spelling, but I think they should have just changed it full on to the English word breaking. In this video, because it is an English pun of a name, I'm going to be calling him Breaking Boss. Now, one more term I find important to talk about is what they actually call Kashan. In Japanese, he's called Shinzo Ningen Kashan, and I've seen it translated in many ways. Newly built man, neo-human, ultimate human, something along the lines of above human, which the Japanese friend said it's not a clean translation. Personally, I like neo-human best because it rolls off the tongue, and it's what the series is commonly called in English now, so I may as well conform to it. Moving on, we have Luna, and this requires a look at another two-parter, episode 3 and 4. After Luna got saved by Lucky, we don't see her for the rest of the first two episodes. To her knowledge, Breaking Boss attacked the Azuma family, and they likely died. Despite that likely scenario, she's hopeful that Tetsuya's alive and walks around looking for him, unaware that Tetsuya did kinda die to birth Kashan. Once she did find him, he pretends to not know who Tetsuya is. She can already see through his lies though. Despite the tomfoolery, she brings Tetsuya to her father, a scientist friend of Dr. Azuma's, who shows off his new invention, a gun that uses the power of 70s cartoon science to only kill robots. A grand invention that can never be turned against our human hero. This weapon is known as the Magnetic Field Gun, or MF gun for short. Then sparking a new question. Who's gonna use the MF gun? Initially, the heroes think to give it to Kashan, but as things go on, that idea slowly shifts. After action scenes, dramatic talks between Luna and Kashan, Swanee Mummy showing up twice because fuck the full moon thing, and Luna's dad dying, it ends up with Kashan trusting Luna to hold the MF gun so she can journey with him and friend her, which means Kashan gets a cool action girl like some other Tatsunoko shows. Kind of. So Luna has a good setup. She's Tetsuya's childhood friend, has a scientist father, and wants to help Kashan as one of the few people that knows his secrets, giving her an interesting dynamic with him. I also love her design next to Kashan and Friender. Her pink outfit with actual skin showing makes the group outfits with the blue Friender and the white Kashan just have more variety. She's got most of the makings for a cool secondary protagonist, except she accomplishes very little in fights. Like, there's some episodes where we get a whole fight scene and then suddenly the showrunners realize, oh shit, Luna's just stood there watching. So they have her shoot 2 robots and then disappear for a while. I get it, they imply she's helping and killing more robots than they show, so I'll give it a gold star as far as a 1970s boys show goes, but she really doesn't do much in the middle episodes, besides a few where they make a point of emphasizing her. There's even a few where they totally remove her, and those episodes are some of my favorite ones. Which I guess is as good a time as any to get into what a typical episode of Kashan looks like. Kashan, like many children's action cartoons, follows the formula of single episodes that start and end a new primary conflict within 22 minutes, while a greater one lasts the whole series, and maybe there's some minor ones interspersed there. That's not bad. I like monster/conflict of the week stories, and Kashan does it fine enough, especially in the context of the 70s before the home video market. Kids will wait all week for the new episode of Kashan, and if an episode doesn't hit a certain beat like a new character introduction or action scene, then kids might feel like the episode was wasted. Kids couldn't watch their favorite episode that they recorded on VHS yet. All you got is the officially licensed Kashan watering can until next week. To break it down, over half the episodes go kinda like this. Androforce causes a problem, Kashan heads to fight that problem or is already there to deal with it, a quick look at Breaking Boss scheming, a one-off character or group, usually human but not always, is introduced, they instill a message into Kashan, mostly a new reason to keep fighting, action scene, and most of the time, an important character introduced in the episode dies. Typically, one who was wrong about something and then learned a lesson not long before death, making making him into a bit of a martyr. Plus, there's a final line by the narrator saying if Kashan won't do it, then who will? Obviously referring to his power to save everyone with a power no one else has. Episodes shake up the order a little bit, maybe add in an extra fight at the start as a warning shot, and go a mostly different route for episodes important to the overarching story. But I counted over 21 of the 35 episodes that follow this formula pretty closely, and a few extras that just go a tiny bit off the beaten path. Even the recap episode followed the formula. For an example of an episode that follows it to a T, we've got episode 8. It opens up at Breaking Boss's castle. He's recovering in a pod after getting attacked by Frender, and no, that part is not shown. It sparks his new idea to make a robot leopard because leopards are stronger than dogs, so the robot leopard's got to beat the robot dog, right? He doesn't beat the robot dog. To make that happen, he kidnaps a new scientist to build the bot, and his blonde daughter Yoko as collateral. Breaking Boss orders Yoko to steal the MF gun from Kashan, who just so happens to be in the nearby city. So Yoko steals the gun while they're asleep, runs off hating Kashan and Luna after a dramatic verbal confrontation, action scene where Breaking Boss kills a lot of military with his new leopard. Yoko then takes Kashan's side to help save her father, action ends, she's dead. And when I put just these outlines together, it sounds pretty simple. It's what's underneath that makes it shine. Every episode is filled with moments proving the strength of characters, parts where their morals and courage shine through. For example, the confrontation after the gun stealing. Our three heroes confront Yoko, but not one of them is prepared to attack her, and they even trust that she won't attack them. Kashan here, mad lad, walks right up to her. She's holding the MF gun right to his chest and pulls the bluff of, "Hey, cool gun, but it doesn't work on humans, and I'm absolutely totally human, so there's no point in shooting me." And she could still shoot Kashan here if she wants. In fact, Kashan being human would give her less guilt if she pulled the trigger. Get out her anger with the knowledge he's safe, like when you jump on an NPC in a Mario game. Yet she doesn't. She lets Kashan take the MF gun, and I think that says a lot more than if it was forcibly removed. Yoko isn't a bad person. She doesn't even agree with Breaking Boss. She's merely stuck in a situation where she's worried about the survival of her family. Once she realizes the harm this worry of herself could have on the world, she gives up the gun and risks herself for Kashan. This is how it goes for many characters in the series. Sacrifice your own needs for the sake of the collective. Usually that means death. I cannot stress how many individuals die. In one episode, it's the elephant who's upset with the robots, and in another, it's Carl, the next in line to lead the Carl Man tribe. Okay, yeah, there's not really a point to those two, I just think it's funny. This death of the individual is heavily in line with the collectivist mindset of most Asian cultures, an idea that's partially in every iteration of Kashan. And while I am saying the death of the individual, I'd say it's more noticeable in episodes without literal death. Episodes where characters live on to better human existence. For example, episode 9 introduces a town that's known for its art and music. The people there don't want to leave or succumb to Androforce because they love and cherish the culture their city is allowed to flourish. It leads to some citizens putting on a concert to bring everyone's spirits up, while Kashan, Luna, and Frender deal with the fight outside. Kashan is fighting to make sure these people live so they can help humanity in their own way, while Kashan's sustained drive to fight for people gives them the courage they need. Kashan is a hero across the land, becoming somewhat of a fantasy hero to them. Kashan's fantasy elements, even more than the sci-fi ones, direct the atmosphere of the series. Like I said, I think it's more accurate to say this is a fantasy superhero show that just so happens to have high-tech gadgets and robots. Take Swanee, for example. She's pretty obviously supposed to be a Swan Lake type of thing with a human trapped in a swan body. But instead of saying it's magic, we have a scientific explanation with Dr. Azuma putting Midori in the swan. Additionally, you may have noticed by now, Kashan and Frender don't walk into sci-fi, futuristic, or even modern cities that much. No, instead they mostly resemble colonial-era Europe or Latin American towns with vague references to where they are, or made-up names to hide what it's actually based on. For example, they'll name the vaguely European town Mexico City, followed 5 episodes later with just actual Mexico. The towns normally have some marble columns, castles, a close proximity to lakes and forests, an architectural aesthetic not found in modern cities that you'd find in Asia or modern Americas. We see some outliers players with a clear Southeast Asian or Middle Eastern look, but still a majority are a vague Europe and a few are Latin American. Most sci-fi anime try to shy away from any specific nationality, like keeping Japanese words off the screen. It's a trend that Tezuka started to sell Astro Boy overseas, and it helped with minimizing the localization process. You don't need to ascribe a sci-fi scenario to any country unless you think it's necessary to the story. Just call it High Tech City 4 or Spaceport 9. It only needs to be Space Singapore if you really want it to. Well, something I noticed with fantasy series is that they go in a weird reverse way of going super Europe. Just base it all on Europe since they drove the global narrative for hundreds of years. Look at most JRPGs or isekai anime for an example. Now, Kashan has this interesting mix of scientific advancements greater than modern day humans, and also clear Eurocentric fantasy settings. It's a type of setting that I feel like a lot of RPGs and anime kind of took over a little bit. One that pops into my mind is Phantasy Star, which is clearly a fantasy type setting, but still with robots and all that technology. Which, to be clear, I'm not saying Kashan is the 100% trendsetter for it. Most examples you can find are probably more blatantly ripping off Star Wars. Anyways, we have some episodes that take place entirely within a factory, while the next one has Kashan getting crucified. Oh shit, yeah, Kashan has a lot of Christian symbolism. Like I said, humans in the world of Kashan like to believe in him. Kashan gives them hope and determination for a brighter future if they work together, and I guess you could call that a faith in Kashan. Kashan, as an immortal, will always be there for the people, kinda like Jesus, and has sacrificed his life for the sake of his father and the world's sins. Like Jesus. Yeah, there's even another episode where Kashan was put to a horrible death before being brought back a few days later. Am I saying that the series is trying to surrogate Kashan in as Jesus here and there? Yeah, I am. It's kinda hard to argue. Because again, he was fucking crucified. I really have to wonder if it's something they consciously thought about from the start, or if they decided to roll with the punches after noticing the similarity. With his loss of humanity, Kashan seemingly finds more appreciation in life, even life crafted in a laboratory. There's a few episodes where individual robots defect from Androforce. The one I'll talk about, because I find it the most interesting, was with a bot named Android 5. As a robot built to look human, Breaking Boss sends Android 5 to trick Kashan into capture. Later on, after seeing the horrors Breaking Boss subjects Kashan to, he saves him and they go on the run. Throughout the episode, Android 5 laments he can't live a normal human life, mirroring Kashan. To make him feel better, Kashan reveals his secret to Android 5, that he himself is a robot. Kashan's resolve to hide his secret and live among men thus inspires Android 5 to live like a human, even renaming himself George to honor a dead kid they found. George's story, in addition to the other non-evil robot episodes, sets the stage for the nuance that is free will in artificial life. These episodes with defected Androforce robots don't paint them as heroes, but more often as people trying to live. And if they go to battle, it's for the same reason as the humans. They have no choice. Which I think is as good a time as any to move on to Kashan's other sci-fi elements. Like I said earlier, the robots and other machinery are more of an addition to the fantasy. However, Kashan actually does have something that I don't see other anime or really any science fiction of the time doing, and that would be having a self-contemptuous robot in the lead. Let me explain here. Tons of anime before Kashan starred robots. We'd seen the first robot hero, controlled robot, and the first piloted robot by this point. And remember, TV anime was built off of a robot star. However, Kashan still has what seems a first to me. First robot to resent his robotitude. Sure, there's the occasional character that might be mean to Astro for being a robot, but the story framed it where that person is an outlier and the characters themselves are typically comfortable in their status as a robot outside of the first episode or maybe a one-off plot. Kashan goes against that by never feeling comfortable in his own skin, living in torment at his life, stuck in a robot body. He yearns for humanity, which is why he cherishes humanity more than anyone else. And through episodes like the one with George I already mentioned, he cherishes life from anywhere he sees it. My favorite of those is this episode with a puppy, but I really don't want to spoil this one. It is fucking amazing. Kashan's suffrage is what makes him endearing as a hero and as a neo-human. That understanding of two sides. What kinda sucks even more for him is that it wasn't entirely within his control. Yes, he chose to become an android, but he didn't choose for society to hate robots. Before Breaking Boss starts his army, it's implied that society doesn't have much of a problem with them. Yet afterwards, everyone decides that all robots are evil and being a robot is inherently worse than being human. Meaning that the moment Kashan admits he's a human, he will be ostracized. Which does eventually happen. At episode 26, roughly the 2/3 point of the series, Androforce figures out that Kashan is a robot and tells everyone. From this point on, Kashan has more to prove. Until this point, Kashan could walk into a town during a conflict with Androforce, and at least one person in the town would trust him based on reputation. Now he has to help from the sidelines since only Luna trusts him, and even her, Kashan tries to shove away in shame. Kashan is not serving humanity anymore. He's subservient to him, below the humans in a class system. Episode 31, in my opinion, shows that the best with Kashan forced to help a leader of a Russian city analog that's cold-hearted to humans and robots. He wants Kashan to kill a human scientist that's helping Androforce for a complex reason, and maybe save his son. Then when Kashan fails to save that son, the man doesn't care much, staying cold and stern while forcing a greater rift between himself and the scientist as Kashan tries to forgive that scientist. It portrays Kashan's ability to forgive, like Jesus, and the corruption of high-ranking officials in a more realistic way than any other episode. At some points, almost feeling closer to Gundam than the rest of Kashan. Makes you really wonder who directed this episode. So most of what I've talked about so far is why I like Kashan and aspects that I'd consider significant. But as you may guess by most of y'all, not knowing who Kashan was before watching this or by looking at the view count of like 12 on this video, Kashan didn't catch fame like some other Tatsunoko series. He's still considered a mainstay superhero like Palomar or Gatchaman, he appears in the crossovers, but you won't see as many people talk enthusiastically about the series as with Gatchaman or even later Kashan iterations. The first and most obvious reason, Kashan gets really dark and melodramatic compared to its contemporaries. Lots of death, torture, slow conversations between action scenes, sad characters with only the small spark of hope, and the muted colors compared to Gatchaman didn't do it much for getting the key audience of young children. I'm guessing kids that liked Kashan more were the weird kids on the playground. It's just not what they were looking for. Speaking of what they're looking for, robots. We've got Kashan, Breaking Boss, Breaking Boss's 3 generals, Frender's vehicle transformations I never mentioned, and the basic robots. But here's where the issue comes in. There's not a lot of robotic variety in Kashan. This round boy with a dildo tip is who you see the most, and you better get used to him. Almost every robot looks kinda derivative of these, and they're not that stand out. For example, there are some episodes where Androforce builds their big Kashan killing robot, and they visually don't stand too different from each other. Large robot with big shoulder line and probably a helmet head. I recall few distinct robot designs throughout the series. Thematically, I guess it portrays a mass-produced vibe that they're aiming at, but in the practice of making me remember them, it falls off a tad. Given how anime has always relied on merchandise sales to offset production costs, I can assume that this lack of variety also impacted toy sales and production. That theory of mine is also supported when we look at the actual toys they sold. A few of these are very marketable robots or mechs that only appeared in the final few episodes. So it seems that in a last attempt to either keep the series going or maximize their profits, they made some more marketable robots at the tail end. That part's just an assumption though. And honestly, I wouldn't care that much in series by other companies, shorter ones, or a game, but Kashan goes for 35 episodes and is done by Tatsunoko. They're the first anime company ever to credit a machine designer, have multiple series where a new mech is introduced every week, and their series starring the robot hero is where the variety falls. I think it's alright to expect a bit better from them. Another aspect limiting Kashan's popularity might be the lack of polish in the animation. It's alright enough, but I wouldn't call it up to par with contemporary Tatsunoko shows like Gatchaman, and honestly the Pinocchio one has some better looking parts too. If you know me, you know I don't like to talk about things I dislike too long, so let's offset that with some positive things. God, do I love the designs of the main cast. Looking at the evolution of Tatsunoko art, I feel that this is the one where Yoshitaka Amano's vision got to seep in more. Not that this went from Tatsuo's Speed Racer to Cecil Harvey from Final Fantasy IV, but we can kinda see a midway point here. Mainly when we look at the male character's limbs and waist sizes, I can see it. Tetsuo drew characters with buff or standard waist with typical limb lengths, while Kashan we see with the slimmer waist and long limbs, giving him a more androgynous look that RPGs and anime would pick up later. Because of that, I can guess that Amano drew up the final revisions to the character sheet used in the series. Shinzo Ningen Kashan would air its 35th and final episode on June 25th, 1974. Due to the waning popularity of it and the 1973 global oil crisis, they couldn't maintain a sponsor. So Tatsunoko cut the series short with a somewhat rushed ending. In the final 2 episodes, they hastily reunite Kashan with his family. With Dr. Ozma by his side in a plan to stop Breaking Boss, all of society bands together to take upon Androforce, who's taken over a third of the world, and then Kashan and Breaking Boss have their climactic final battle. Which, to be honest, the hand-to-hand final battle, one of my favorite parts of most finales, is a little lacking here. Between the bright lighting and moves we've seen before, it doesn't strike me much when rechecking it to right. However, I remember reaching this part during my full series watch and feeling rewarded at this fight. Any other time Kashan came up against Breaking Boss, something got in the way, usually the stupid solar energy weakness. So seeing these two androids representing the good and bad of humanity, finally duke it out to their fullest power felt great. Kashan had the entire support of man behind him, this community that he's helped, while Breaking Boss was the final member of his army. A classic tale of the powers of good banding together to triumph over evil. After Kashan defeats Breaking Boss with his super move, there's another part they kinda rush. Dr. Ozma returns Midori to her human form, but has to remind Kashan that his transformation is permanent, something he was ready for. He has to live the rest of his life in his immortal, unchanging robot body. Everyone around him can feel and live like humans, while he's going to be just one step to the side of that. It's a downer note to end on, which is why I'm glad they gave it one more positive kick. Dr. Ozma gives one promise to try figuring out how to save his son, and then Kashan, Frender, and Luna find a reprogrammed BK-1 helping society, sparking a big laugh at the irony of him helping everyone that we end the series on. Kashan's finale, even if rushed, drives in the messages of the series. The good in humanity can overcome any evil if they band together as a collective. It's the trust in those next to you, even if they seem different, that can make the world better. Even with Kashan's weird direction and lacking elements, the overarching themes of humanity banding together and Kashan's unwavering resolve are what got me to love this original series. Seeing how he inspires people and how they motivate him at his low points made me want to see where he went next. Which gets me to where the staff went next, because a lot of them went on for great things. Tatsunoko was known as a breeding ground for creativity, so it's not much of a shock. Of course, Sasagawa stayed with Tatsunoko for a while, so we'll mention him again later. While one of the screenwriters, Koyami Takao, scripted much of the Saint Seiya, Dragon Ball, and Dragon Ball Z anime adaptations, as well as every single Dragon Ball Z movie script, among other things. One episode director, Yoshiyuki Tomino, the one with experience, moved over to Sunrise, an animation studio founded by former Mushi production staff members. There he invented a small-known robot franchise called Gundam. And lastly, I want to mention Yuji Nunokawa. He was one of Tatsunoko's star writers and left a few years later. At that point, he founded his own studio known as Studio Pierrot, a familiar name for anyone that's a fan of Naruto or Bleach, since they did the anime for those. More important for what we're getting to next is that Studio Pierrot started the home video market for anime in the mid-80s, which is going to be relevant in our next section. For For the rest of the 70s, Tatsunoko still had a moderate amount of success. Nothing hit the highs of Gatchaman's popularity, but like I said, that's not really a realistic expectation with the growing anime market. While they kept up with the superhero shows, Tatsunoko still experimented a lot in the 70s, trying out full-on mecha anime superheroes with weirder mixes of genre, and they even made debatably the first isekai anime with Paul's Miraculous Adventure. That one's not subtitled, and it'd be really cool if someone picks that up as a project. Undoubtedly, their big hit in the second half of the 70s was the Time Bokan series, a comedic superhero franchise directed by Sasagawa that put major focus on the villain's exploits rather than that of the heroes. Every year they'd swap out the characters and alter the premise while still keeping a similar core of heroes versus villain with a brand new mech of different shapes every week. The original series did alright, while the second iteration, Yataman, was an outstanding success. It featured some wonderfully sleek designs for the core cast and main villains that are so likable through their failure that you wish they could win. To put into perspective how popular it was, most Time Bokan shows ran for 1 year at 52 episodes, while Yataman ran for 2 years at 108 episodes. That's even 3 more than the original Gatchaman. And it sold so many toys. New robots every week let them make a toy out of fucking anything. If there's a third series that goes next to Speed Racer and Gatchaman for popularity, it's Yataman, which was great for Tatsunoko when there was something not so great going on. On September 5th, 1977, Tatsuo Yoshida, founder and heart of the company, passed away due to liver cancer at the age of 45. His devotion to manga, open mind to getting into anime, and positive relationship with his staff made him one of the most respected men in the industry. Sadly, Tatsuo's death was timed pretty badly for the company. Ever since Gatchaman ended, there had been a slow drip of staff members leaving the company, which was sped up by Tatsuo's death. Some went freelance, others saw better paychecks and ideas closer to their own at alternative studios, and many that actually made their own studios. Studios that Tatsunoko would work with in the coming years. Most relevant for the 80s would be their work with Artland and Artmech on the Mecha series Macross and Genesis Climber Mostpedia respectively. Macross for how big the series became over time, and Mostpedia for their work with Artmech that would later help on the Kashan OVA. Besides that, Tatsunoko's 80s exploits aren't too relevant to Kashan, so we're gonna skip over that. They created a lot of good anime there, so I would recommend looking around, but I gotta choose where to cut some stuff. What's actually important in the 80s for us is the growth of the home video market. In 1983 and 1984, Yuji Nunokawa's Studio Pierrot released the series Dalos on VHS in Japan. It was a sci-fi story that they pitched as a TV series at one point that would have played after Magical Princess Minky Momo since the series was set to be cancelled. But then the station reversed their plan to cancel it, and Dalos went into development limbo for a short while. Pierrot eventually decided that they still wanted to make the series, and maybe selling it as a VHS could help with finding a sponsor for a TV series. That never happened. Instead of the VHS tape sparking interest in Dalos, it made studios realize, hey, VHS players are getting commonplace. Let's put our shows on it. The OVA scene flourished over the next few years. First couple of OVAs were kind of experimenting with what they should do with it. Established studios like Tatsunoko would take their pre-made footage and stitch them together into recap videos, and also put out a few long-form animated music videos that I can best describe as the AMV predecessors. And then there was the independent anime scene that could come back after years of not having an outlet. Over the next few years, the OVA feel started to form. Typically, they were around 30 to 60 minutes with higher quality animation since they didn't have a tight TV budget, and they could put in detailed violence, nudity, and harsher themes since they didn't have TV censors to worry about. That's essentially how OVAs would continue for the following 30 years. Net animation today is kind of blurring this boundary, but Kashan stops at 2009. I don't need to go into that today. Anyways, after Tatsunoko experimented a little with OVAs and found success with, of all things, a Tekka Man reboot, which the original flopped, Tatsunoko teamed up with Artmech to produce a 4-episode retelling of Kashan with modern sensibilities. A series known as Robot Hunter Kashan, while having a similar premise and outline to the original series, is very distant tonally and in practice. Something you'd expect by the 20-year gap in productions, distribution format, and episode amounts. I'm starting with that to prep you all for this. Robot Hunter Kashan is one of the most unabashedly 90s VHS OVAs you'll ever watch, and I fucking love it. Does it have the deep messaging of the other 3 iterations? Absolutely not. Robot Hunter is running off of vibes and badassery alone. With that said, there isn't really a whole lot to delve into on this series in comparison to the first iteration. It still follows the basic good guy with a gun versus bad guy with a gun story with all the same main characters from the original series, though Segure ate the Impossible Whopper and got feminized. Most of its themes and identities are present, though shuffled around by what's a core part of it and what's a backup. Because of all those reasons, I'm mostly going to be talking about Robot Hunter in contrast to the original Neo-Human series. Don't mistake that as me trying to say which one's better. Each series has different goals and pretty much the opposite strengths and weaknesses. Even from the very start, Robot Hunter sets itself apart. Robot Hunter skips the origin story of Kashan and Breaking Boss. Breaking Boss and Andro Force have already taken over much of Earth, seemingly more than they ever did in the original series. Like, before the whole show starts, they make it clear how threatening Breaking Boss's army is, thanks in part to the mechanical design. Like, it's fucking good. The best way I can put it is detailed. We see the Andro Force factory producing these elaborate robots with more wires, protrusions, and guns than anything we saw in the original Kashan, as well as them attacking cities. I think it's clear as how much more elaborate they are when you compare this shot of the mass-produced flame robot storming through a city with an identical shot from the original show. This montage also subtly sets up the hierarchy of robots better than the original by showing these blue dudes with spikes as the weakest mass-produced bots, pink whip guys as the ones that watch over humans, and obviously the Andro Force generals and Breaking Boss up top. It gets so much done so quickly with just that fucking added detail, which with the allowance of more blood, makes them more threatening when they actually hurt a human. Like, Neo-Human did have many parts where humans got shot, blown up, or stabbed by a robot, but there's still a little goofiness to it. It really doesn't matter what you did in the 1970s, a TV budget limited animation series done mostly by fresh animators would never distill fear like a 90s OVA by experienced staff. Speaking of the change in eras, I think one of the benefits of the year is also how real-world technology had advanced. Back in the 60s and 70s, we had no clue where technology was going. Neo-Human had sci-fi writer Takumi Shibano as a sci-fi consultant, but that could only go so far in comparison to living 30 more years. It's the same thing as how the Jetsons had flying cars, but not cell phones. We knew the world entered an age of scientific advancement, we just didn't know what was being advanced. So in Neo-Human, everything was way too out there, while in Robot Hunter it's all like just a few steps above what we have now. And yet again, the big plus with every piece of tech is the detail. We can see so many flashing lights with numbers on them, lines of code that probably don't mean anything, tanks not too much better than the real ones, and electric crosses. Talk about conversion shock therapy. Even the human plans have more detail than those in Neo-Human. Let's take episode 3 for example. This one is sort of meant as representative of a middle episode of the original, while episodes 1 and 2 replace the intro and episode 4 is the finale. Throughout the episode, Luna, Frender, and Kashan are helping a human settlement with the Andro Force problem. Andro Force is forcing human slaves to build a railroad bridge for them. It'll be used to transport a secret item, and if they don't finish the bridge in half a month, then Breaking Boss will execute 10 people per day, which is a great way to make the bridge take even longer. How the humans plan to handle this takes a bit of time. Instead of fighting Andro Force head on or doing one big thing to win like in the lot of Neo-Human, they stop and think about the plan. First, the enslaved humans are going to finish the bridge, and on one of the pieces, a slave will attach a bomb given by the Human Rebellion group to the rails, which will go off once Breaking Boss crosses the bridge. A little simple when put to page, but the way in which they go into detail about it is captivating. It gives Robot Hunter a wartime drama feel, while Neo-Human left that majorly as a background element. Having both slaves and rebels with real-world countries on top of it also makes the human factions feel more defined. Yeah, it's pretty obvious in the original show when something is analogous to Mexico or Russia, but straight up calling it by their country name adds more flavor quickly when you only have 4 episodes. Like, if you have a country that's basically China yet call it something else, that doesn't clearly define if the thousands of years of Chinese history occurred or not. Calling it China removes that mystery history, letting us move on quickly with just the real-world knowledge of that country. I'm not saying every series should do this or that it's always the better option, just saying that the fake country names didn't add much to Neo-Human, and when you only have 4 episodes, you've gotta save time where you can. Speaking of saving time, episode 1, we're flung right into the world. I mentioned how well it introduces Androforce, and somehow its treating of Kashan and Luna are even better. Well, besides with the Bechdel test, Luna does not pass that one. Robot Hunter leans even harder into the fantastical element of Kashan the hero, making his legend even more questionable than it was before. In fact, he's hardly in the first episode. Here, everyone knows about the legend of Kashan. He's a hero that fights against Androforce for the sake of humanity. Everyone knows of the story, but are unsure if the person is real. Episode 1 sticks to this narrative hard, to the point where Luna is the leading protagonist for it and most of episode 2, which is a good time to look at Luna closer, because man, she got an upgrade. Like, iffy part out of the way, she's sexualized heavily. Am I getting offended? I don't want to stay on the subject. That's kind of just what happens in action anime at the time, and especially in OVAs. Pick a random 80s or 90 OVA and you'll find at least one bikini armor within every 10 rolls minimum. Besides that part, she's gotten a total upgrade, mainly in her priority and autonomy. She had some in Kashan, but it was undermined by her standing to the side most episodes, getting captured too many times, and having those episodes where they just wrote her out. Robot Hunter starts with her on a journey. Luna didn't wait for Kashan to show up and invite her to take ibuprofen. She opened the pill bottle herself and took it. She has some motivation, 2 actually. Her first is to deliver the MF gun information to the military, and her second is to find her boyfriend Tetsuya, who went missing a few years ago after Breaking Boss started his conquest, giving Luna an added backstory that she's been around the block for the past 3 years. She knows how to fight and protect herself with a heavily redesigned MF gun. Luna's autonomy and the legend of Kashan fuses a bit here in the middle, when the human slaves believe Luna to be Kashan. It doesn't matter to them that Luna fights that notion, they are under a new belief that she is Kashan, or at the very least, she can be Kashan, as if it's a title rather than a person. It's such an interesting play on how humans treated Kashan in Neo-Human. Back then he was accepted as existing, and once he showed up, he'd fix the problem. In Robot Hunter, humans are less sure on if he'll show up. Like, he's probably exist, he's gotta, because if not, then we're fucking toast. But there's that underlying fear of, what if he's not real, or what if he never comes here? And it's that fear creating a tiny bit of hope that makes them attribute the Kashan title to others, such as Luna. Even once Kashan does show himself to Luna, he still refuses to be blunt about his identity. Just like in Neo-Human, she yet again knows he's Tetsuya, and he refuses to say it. Only at the end of the episode does he show himself out in the daylight to humans, Luna, and Androforce to make his legend solidified. Kashan rips out all the robot pieces of Androforce's army, moves at speeds unmatchable, and even decapitates Akuban in the cleanest way you can think of. Kashan got a serious buff since Neo-Human. He could likely kill Breaking Boss right now if it weren't for plot-contrived seizures giving him the chance to escape, and I'm a fire in my laser! That's about where the first episode ends. Atmosphere and world design knocks it out of the park immediately here. You could pick this up, watch it, and satisfy your 90s robot anime itch, if you're okay with not having an ending. Moving on, the following episodes inscribe the ethos of both Kashan and Breaking Boss in a succinct way that somehow matches the original series. Kashan's base goals and backstory is about the same. He gave up his humanity to save the world, and he has some hang-ups about that. Yet instead of him standing there and monologuing about it every episode, we get that knowledge through his actions. Back at episode 1, until the very end, he's embarrassed by his robotics, walking around with cloth covering his whole body, and he even gave friend under a fur texture to hide him. And it's clear by his interaction with Luna that he doesn't want her to know that Tetsuya became a robot. Episode 2 then has a Swanee mommy reunion moment. Unlike most episodes of the original show, Swanee isn't looking for Kashan to quickly pass on information and leave. No, instead they're just seeing each other, completely silent, downcast about their forced separation. Kashan and his mother are relishing in the moment they can see each other, with Kashan clearly regretting that he couldn't stop Breaking Boss from kidnapping his parents. Kashan's relationship with Luna has also received slight tweaks that I'd call better. For one, they're explicitly romantic now. Neo Human kept them at a close 1970s kids show friendship point where you can kinda see them together with how they care about each other and the way Luna talks about Tetsuya. But there's nothing unquestionably romantic between them. Robot Hunter quickly tells you Tetsuya was her boyfriend and she wants to get him back, which adds another human aspect that Tetsuya gave up in becoming Kashan: physical romance. Yeah, Kashan still has the heart of man in every iteration, so friendships like what he had with Luna aren't an issue for him. But physical intimacy, that's not gonna happen. Kashan can't hold Luna in his warm embrace anymore. He's a cold machine that just has to live with this. Luna knows that as well at this point. Kashan's relationship with both his mother and Luna feel more well-rounded to me, despite them technically giving us less. And perhaps it's this less is more in the story department that gives Kashan the human more of a mystery. The mystery of an other, a robot that saves everyone and doesn't talk much afterwards. Speaking of, Breaking Boss as well has a more defined motivation. Originally he wanted to make humans subservient to robots to get back at them, plus he was meant as an anti-pollution robot. The former is a fine enough motivation for a 70s villain, but that second part as an anti-pollution bot doesn't come to play at all during Neo Human. Additionally, robot-related stories evolved a lot over those 20 years. Robot is evil because the lightning said so doesn't fly as much in the 90s. Because of that, Robot Hunter connects the two parts of him. During a flashback to when Breaking Boss burnt down the research center Kashan's family lived in, we learned that he wasn't shocked by lightning at all this time, and he's not really insane either. Actually, he has one of the most advanced AIs of all time, an AI still meant to save the Earth from its pollution problem. Why it backfires is because Breaking Boss deems it best for the Earth if man, the polluters, are wiped from Earth, while the robots, which also exhaust energy, are replaced with a new solar-powered model known as Neoroiders, which Dr. Azuma was working on. The title of those robots being a nice callback to the initial pitch of Kashan. This story means that Breaking Boss, a creation of Dr. Azuma, is trying to complete his life's work of ending pollution, paralleling Kashan, also a creation of Dr. Azuma, trying to complete his life's work of helping humanity. With Breaking Boss, it's to the point where he has an obsession with Azuma's goal though, respecting him for that goal, but not with a respect for humanity. His resolve to spread a distorted message of Dr. Azuma really makes the final clash between Kashan following his father's idea of saving humanity and Breaking Boss following his creator's dream of saving nature all the more enticing. Going on while humanity is yet again banded together outside fighting the rest of Androforce. And I gotta say, Kashan and Breaking Boss's battle here is absolutely what I wish the original had. It's raw beyond words, you gotta watch it. Robot Hunter has another bittersweet ending like the original, but with what I'd call an inverse of which part is bitter and which part is sweet. Kashan and his parents seem to die with Breaking Boss while humanity barely survives the battle with Androforce, while Luna, having lost Kashan yet again, is on the hunt for him because she's not fully convinced he's dead. Additionally, no clue on if Breaking Boss lived. Humanity's victorious with little idea that Kashan is the one that saved them, but hey, the world is saved. Robot Hunter Kashan is definitely a product of its time. It aimed to modernize the Kashan story, but sadly, the trends of the 90s ended up being one of the most dated eras to modernize something. The intense action, nudities, 90s as hell music, it's like if I said I'm modernizing Journey to the West with Beavis and Butthead. You can't disassociate this from the time it came out, which I do think that's what gives Robot Hunter most of its charm and robotic heart. Yet again, Kashan himself is one of the driving forces. However, where in the original it was his external interactions with one-off characters that made him engaging, here they've really figured out how to portray his inner struggle. And that was all within 3 episodes, since the first one focused on Luna. who also, like I said, had a giant upgrade. Another interesting part of this is how it swapped the important parts. Besides Swan-Yi and all of Kashan's yearning, Robot Hunter downplays the fantasy elements in comparison to the militant sci-fi aesthetic. By dying at the end, Kashan's immortality is also put up for more debate, which might signal that he was a living man and not a legend. Or he is a legend since his death is vague, or more likely, Kashan the man has finally died and the legend lives on. It depends how you want to interpret it. The closer look towards Kashan and Luna also leads to a slight downplay of the collective should band together theme the original had. It's probably most noticeable at the end when in the original series much of humanity is behind Kashan during his big fight with Breaking Boss, while in Robot Hunter it's a one-on-one battle while humanity is doing their own thing. I also have to wonder if they had actual hopes of a sequel OVA. Given that Robot Hunter was a somewhat faithful reimagining of Kashan and it was Tatsunoko's first OVA reboot, they probably weren't entirely sure if they'd keep the story going or not. Personally, I'm glad they didn't. Given the era, it would probably get a little too edgy and maybe harm the integrity of the original series. What Casshern Sins does later is a far better follow-up in my opinion, so I'm glad the franchise stayed dormant for another decade, especially because of what Tatsunoko did next. For the rest of the 90s, Tatsunoko didn't do that much unexpected. Their output had slowed down to no more than 2 projects at a time, which mostly meant fairy tale adaptations like Robin Hood and more hero reboots like Gatchaman, Palomar, and a Speed Racer reboot with a flashy as hell second opening. Their only original series that really caught over in the West was Samurai Pizza Cats. But I also don't want to downplay their licensed works or their co-productions at this time. One really important one is Irresponsible Captain Tyler. It was based on a light novel series and has some great mechanical design plus some fantasy elements. And the second and the absolutely 900% way more important series they did was Neon Genesis Evangelion. And I know that might be stopping a few of y'all because you're thinking, oh, but that's a Gainax show. Well, sort of. Hideaki Anno pitched the show to Gainax because that's where he was technically working, but a majority of the animation was outsourced to Tatsunoko and their subsidiary Production IG. Evangelion's production is a very rocky thing that I'm not getting into today. Just know that Tatsunoko pretty much did the heavy lifting on the animation. And while not relevant for the rest of this video, I think those 2 series, plus Tekkaman, Macross, and Mospedia, helped to cement Tatsunoko's influence on the modern mecha genre. However, it's time to put animation away for a while as we talk about the live-action Kashan movie. So as an animation company, Tatsunoko doesn't make live-action productions. Shocker, I know. To even find one live-action production based on a Tatsuo Yoshida work, we have to go back to Tatsuo's pre-animation days in 1964 to find one live-action TV series called Ninja Butai Gecko. Then between 1964 and 2004, Tatsunoko properties stayed away from live-action. That came to a change in 2004 with the release of Kashan's live-action film directed by Kazuaki Kiriya, an experimental film departing from the classic Kashan story drastically, yet still keeping the heart and messaging of the original. So, to make something clear real fast, this film is very ahead of its time technologically and visually. Kiriya's direction and cinematography are superb, and it has a core message that's a bit ballsy for the year. However, I'm not personally a big fan of it for a few reasons. I respect its innovations and what it's doing, it's just not a film that really resonated with me personally. Since I'm not in love with the film, and YouTube will likely strike me if I use too much footage of the film, I'm gonna make this brief. Something to say first that I was shocked about. This wasn't some needless reboot cash grab. No, actually, Kiriya had the idea of making a Casshern film because he was one of the weird kids on the playground that loved the original series, and went to Tatsunoko himself to request permission for a Casshern film, going forth with that before he even had a studio behind him. Once he got the studio, he was actually taken aback by how much money and freedom they gave him. Casshern required a lot of money for one big reason. It was shot almost entirely in a studio with a green screen. One of the first films to do this, meaning that the technology to make it work was really primitive and really expensive, especially when you take into account that the other American films doing this at the time like Sin City and Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow had $40 and $70 million behind them respectively, while Casshern only had roughly $6 million. And it's still better than Sky Captain. However, I can't stress how primitive this technology was at the time, and Casshern doesn't do much to hide that besides bloom and light effects that make it worse, which is kinda my main problem with the film. The visual effects make it very hard to look at, which I know, I feel a little bad judging a revolutionary cutting-edge film on a tiny budget for being cutting edge before the digital edge got sharpened, but this is how the film is made and it will forever have that imperfection, so I want to get it out of the way now. To compare it to the following year's Sin City, that film hid its digital imperfections in part with a lot of close-ups and the black and white noir lighting. Anyways, Qidia spent 2 months shooting Casshern on the backlot and a further 6 months working on the digital effects and post-production process. Again, it's commendable and I'll talk about what I feel it does well, but just keep my personal opinion in mind if my tone seems a little less than enthusiastic. Immediately, Casshern changes the setting pretty hardcore. Unlike the first series that takes place in a faux medieval Europe setting or the OVA that is basically just post-war Earth, 04 has a clearly defined creative setting taking inspiration from real-world Soviet architecture, propaganda, and Russian avant-garde artwork with Japanese written language and sensibilities put on top of it. Here, in the modern era, a 50-year war between the glorious Asian Federation Republic and Europa has come to an end. AFR seized control of the Eurasian continent, and the only fight left is with a small resistance movement. With the war basically done, AFR's bigger issue comes from all the pollution caused by industrial waste and radioactivity, leading to 60% of citizens to fight with life-threatening diseases and the frogs fight with homosexuality. Because of that, Dr. Ozma has been combating not the pollution this time, but the disease itself. A goal he took in hopes of curing his ill wife, who's still named Midori. When the film starts, Dr. Ozma has made a breakthrough with the discovery of what he's calling the Shinzo cells. Cells that regenerate human tissue such as skins, nerves, and anything, really. Use of these will essentially make someone immortal. An idea the ailing leader of the Federation is interested in, but denies any funding publicly. Instead, he sends a private business representative to Dr. Ozma so he can have his lab. Definitely nothing fishy. Over time, Dr. Ozma gets obsessed with this research since his wife's condition is getting worse, and his useless son Tetsuya ditched him, his mom, and his fiancée Luna to join the military. While gone, Tetsuya dies a war hero to save his comrades, which really pisses his dad off. But it's still a Casshern movie, so we already know he'll gift his son another life later. Skip forward a bit, and on the day that Tetsuya's body is delivered to Dr. Ozma, a bolt of mysticism rock hits the research lab. It turns his incomplete science goop into complete science goop with many immortal neo-humans birthed from it. Neo-humans the military kills a majority of out of fear for what they could do. Only missing 4 of them who escape with Midori, who by this point is completely blind and unable to tell who they are. Outlined to the next few parts are a bit expected for Casshern. Dr. Ozma puts his son in the science goop to bring him back to life. He goes with Luna to her scientist father to receive a weapon, this time the Casshern armor. The neo-humans send a bunch of robots to attack society, and Dr. Ozma is sort of captured. This time it's by the Asian Federation bureaucrats rather than Breaking Boss himself. You can tell it's the same base idea, only with a "but this is slightly different" added on to it. I guess you can say the rest of the film would represent the middle portion of the original show. A single war with 2 sides. Casshern and humanity versus the neo-humans and their robots. However, unlike the original series, neo-humans and Burai, the Breaking Boss replacement, have a good reason for hating humanity. There should have been many neo-humans, but humanity killed them where they stood, shunning the remaining 4 off to Cold Mountain Land, giving them a pretty darn good reason to hate humanity. Even Dr. Ozma, who's pretty much the protagonist in this one, is kind of a jackass. I mean, he hates his son in this one. Even bringing him back to life is a bit more self-serving than previously. In the original, Tetsuya chose the robot life. Well, in the film, Tetsuya doesn't seem too saddened by his own death. And even by the end, Dr. Ozma doesn't give a shit about anything but his wife's survival. All this makes it clear that Qidia wants you to question who's really the good guy and who's the bad guy here. Something he was inspired by because of the Iraq War, a war where America spun a very clear message about how they're the good guys doing nothing wrong, when there must be a second side to the story being suppressed. Both sides are causing harm to someone, so what's the someone's point of view? That's where I'm gonna stop connecting it to the Iraq War though, because I don't want to put much of that in the video, still ostensibly about the dumb 70s kids cartoon. Also, I imagine most of y'all are old enough to have lived through it. With that, the film continues for an hour and a half of intense action scenes that get stopped with messages about the tragedies of war, political backstabbing, what it means to live, and a bit of a forced message about humanity banding together, which, yeah, I get that was in the original, but the film has so much distrust, I don't get why that was thrown in. I guess it's trying to use the example of the world went to shit because of everyone fighting, so we should come together as a collective human race, but it's still kinda forced right at the end. Like some flashes showing the world that could have been and pretty much nothing else. To be quite honest, the basic plot of this film isn't a strong point for me either. I don't feel like it carried over messages from the original and OVA as well, and the ones that it introduces are done better with Sins. However, the cinematography fucks in this film. As I said, Kidia has great direction, but as a cinematographer, I'd say he's even better. He sets many of the scenes up like a stage play. The core focus is dead center during most scenes, with characters walking in and off stage clearly, upon elaborately decorated sets for what isn't made of CG. Despite the comparatively grounded approach to its story and details, it helps Kashan 04 keep the fantasy feel from the original, because the main parts when it breaks the stage setup is during action scenes, which all, especially the first one with Kashan, fuck hard. I mean, so hard. It actually feels like an anime brought to live action life. Though I guess the keyword should be feel, since it's still a majority CG. Either way, they were the highlight of the film for my Dragon Ball rotted action brain. And to be quite honest, I feel like anything else I could say about the film would be forced at this point. It's not a film I have the strongest opinion about, so it would come off as a film class report if I extended this. So instead, I'm going to talk about the big aspect of it that Sins will take and run with: immortality. I've talked about this a bit already. Kashan is immortal. That's what he claims. If Kashan won't do it, then who will? Previously, we knew this as he can defeat Androforce in part because of his immortality. And as a classic good guy with a gun versus bad guy with a gun story, that worked fine. His powers of immortality let him break out of stone. It's so cool, right? Kashan 04 finally questions that. Why do you want immortality? Will it actually help? Are you living if you can't die? It's the question Kashan 04 poses, and I'm not sure that it explored this idea to the fullest besides a basic, you can't live to the fullest without dying. The film doesn't go into what the fullest is. Why would I want to live, especially in this shithole diseased world? It's a question Sins is gonna be going into, and I think I'm ready to move on to that. Sorry to any big fans of the live action film, I'm sure there's something I'm personally missing here, but it just wasn't for me. I can tell it has merits. I'm sure I could go more into it if I really tried, but I don't think that would be genuine when the rest of my feelings are neutral towards the film. Up next is Casshern Sins, the second TV anime, most recent and most popular of the Kashan projects, and the one I'd consider of the highest quality. However, there's yet again some things to go over before that. Since the last OVA, and especially since the last TV anime, writing standards have changed a lot. Shows are expected to follow a long-running plot thread across the entire series, rather than ignoring it for the entire middle besides a few reminder episodes. For example, in the original Neo-Human series, there's only about 3 to 6 episodes between the first 4 and final 3 that further the overarching plot and Kashan's arc. Throughout 2/3 of the 35 episodes, it is self-contained stories where Kashan is the catalyst for change, while he himself and his relationship with the core cast stays static. And I'll say, that's a dynamic I find endearing. Longtime viewers know how much I love Sonic and Kingdom Hearts, both of which featuring protagonists that function similarly. Having a main character stay mostly the same while the supporting cast changes is something I can get behind. But the obvious difference between those two examples and Kashan is that Kashan has one-off characters changing, not supporting characters that keep coming back. By the time of Casshern Sins in 2009, anime with a young boy audience in mind had evolved a lot. The two series most of note for Casshern Sins being Saint Seiya and Dragon Ball, both of which I think are popular enough where I shouldn't have to explain them. Like, if you don't at least know Dragon Ball, then I don't know what to tell you, dude. The last fact, general anime development includes a pretty big one: freelancers. Freelance animators had already existed prominently by the time of the first Kashan and even Astro Boy, but by the time of Sins, a majority of the industry became freelance. I can't find a stable number by 2008, but by 2017, over 80% of animators in the industry were freelance. So I think it's safe to say that by the time of Sins in 2008, it wasn't a drastically different number. Moving to Tatsunoko itself, there was a bigger shakeup to the company between the Kashan projects. In 2004, Japanese toy company Takara, the second biggest Japanese toy company behind Bandai, bought an 88% share of Tatsunoko. After 40 years, Tatsunoko stopped existing as a family-owned business, with the younger two brothers resigning from the company after keeping it afloat for so long. And I guess I get it. The two of them were in their 60s by this point. They had already left a major mark on the anime world, kept up their brother's vision, and probably felt like it was time to give it up. They also might have not had a choice, because it seems as though Tatsunoko was in a shaky spot financially, so Takara's buyout is likely a factor to why they still exist today. The early 2000s financial numbers aren't public, at least to my knowledge, but if they were willing to go this route in 2005, a time when anime studios were all switching gears technologically, it's safe to assume there was a problem with their current finances. Even their output is a pretty good sign of that. I mentioned how they didn't release a lot in the 90s, but their output in the early 2000s was even less. Again, likely caused by the switch to digital animation, because their two most notable shows were Soul Taker, a digital 2D animated series, and Kata, a hybrid 2D 3D OVA series, which the latter was also the last project Ippei approved before the buyout. Notable since the second half of the series got delayed badly, and the buyout was likely a contributing factor. For the next 3 years, Tatsunoko didn't produce much. They finished Katas, and Sasagawa, who had been retired for a while, came back to direct a funny spin-off of an old comedy show with Tatsuo's daughter Suzuka, making character designs, but besides that, they were silent. Takara was likely trying to get out just a few shows while they figured out how to best use the Tatsunoko brand before getting things in action. It's kind of a bummer that it became more corporate in structure, but a little more forgiving because, well, they used the brands pretty well. Tatsunoko's next few years were all about reconsolidating a Tatsunoko brand in the public eye while innovating and reinterpreting their old IPs. The highest quality of these, in my opinion, being Casshern Sins, that I'm about to talk about for a while, so I'll just mention a few others first. Speed Racer had a spin-off called Mock Girl that yet again had designs by Suzuka Yoshida. Yatterman came back with another kids show in 2008. Gatchaman and Yatterman both got live-action films approved for production, though Gatchaman took longer to materialize. There was the American Speed Racer film that technically didn't have anything to do with Tatsunoko or Takara, since they didn't have the American licensing rights again until the mid-2010s, and that's just me trying to name stuff that released in the ballpark of Casshern Sins development. But you might notice with what I've said so far, they're all either live-action films with licenses or a series aimed at kids. Kids shows parents could safely watch with their kids if they wanted nostalgia, but kids shows nonetheless. Casshern Sins is different. It's a noticeably dark series, one that I, if I were a parent, wouldn't sit my child in front of. Not for violence and nudity like the 90s OVA, more so due to the difficult themes that it tackles, topics of death, life, trust, and joy told in a way that a kid 10 and under probably isn't going to process properly. The original Kashan was held back by being a dark show for kids. You couldn't aim TV anime solely at adults in the early 70s, and so it had to go for children, which made securing a sponsor difficult. Casshern Sins isn't held back by that, and it isn't held back by its staff either. As I said earlier, the original Neo Human series was developed mostly by those with little TV anime experience, partially because not many people had experience back then. The market was less than a decade old. They were lucky to have even just the 3 experienced writers they had, and one was mostly doing comedy. Casshern Sins has the luxury of coming out 43 years after Tatsunoko's premiere work in Space Ace, meaning it is filled to the brim with experienced, skilled, and creative anime professionals. Getting into it, Sins was worked on by 2 companies. Tatsunoko worked on the production, while the animation was outsourced to Madhouse. The series director on this one was Yamauchi Shigeyasu, a man man who clearly didn't have many breaks. He directed and storyboarded a shit ton of episodes of Dragon Ball Z and Saint Seiya, directed a few of the best DBZ movies like Broly and Fusion Reborn, and is still active in the industry today. If you go through his filmography, you'll notice that many of his big works are adaptations, even Kashan. Because of that, he did have to follow a lot of rules with what he made, which is why it's interesting to note that Yamauchi stated Sins was the first project he directed where he got to do absolutely everything he wanted. An interesting thing for Takara to allow when they just bought their fancy new toys. It looks like Yamauchi's DBZ and Saint Seiya experience also guided who he got on Casshern and Sins, because there's a lot of animators with experience from those two properties on Sins. I'm not going to name that because that would take all day, but I'll go over some other people. For character design, we have Umakoshi Yoshihiko. His early designs actually come from shoujo anime, and he's pretty popular in that realm. Like, I'll be straight about this, I haven't watched many of his shoujo works, I'm quite the manly man, but I recall female otaku friends in my youth talking about some of these shows he did. And if your late 90s, early 2000s shoujo anime is talked about at all in the USA, then it was probably good. He developed a striking style of shoujo designs with very elongated limbs, rounder heads, and big hands and feet. It's reminiscent of Mickey Mouse, classic cartoon type styles. If you want to see that cartoony style best, I'd say look at Magical Do-Re-Mi. You can then see him alter his style to fit more serious anime over time, and to be honest, Casshern might be the big tipping point for that. In an interview about the designs, Umakoshi stated that when talking to Yamauchi about the storyline, he couldn't help but make the characters look very Saint Seiya-like. He even tried to avoid that for a bit, but it just came out of him. Many characters' hair looks directly ripped from Saint Seiya, and a few characters, including Casshern himself, have a headgear that materialized similar to Saint Seiya. They're so similar, in fact, that I thought Umakoshi had already done the character design for Saint Seiya Omega, when actually that was a few years later. Anyways, last person I want to mention is Kobayashi Yasuko. Yasuko worked as the general series writer and supervisor, as well as scripting a few episodes herself. Said episodes also show her style of writing. Yasuko is known in her past work for scripting her episodes to explore the main cast's dynamics, not wanting to introduce new characters too much. And if you look at the episodes she scripted, it's the ones that really just hard stop the series to explore relationships before moving on, which is funny when most episodes introduce one-off characters. Yasuko, while familiar with the original series, wanted to make something that could eclipse the original in popularity. And I guess she succeeded on that, because it's my assumption that most people watching this video right now were only familiar with Sins if they were familiar with Kashan at all. Funny on top of that, Yasuko is more popular in the Tokusatsu Kamen Rider fandom than in anime, so Sins, just like the original, has that Kamen Rider influence. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is Casshern Sins isn't a first credit, side project, or experimental work. It was a carefully planned piece of art filled with creative geniuses and storytellers that knew what they were doing. Casshern Sins, if I'm going to reduce it as much as possible, is a story about living. What is it that you do with life, how to work past what's happened, and ways in which your life impacts not just others, but yourself as well. And Sins doesn't give you an answer. Going back to the original show and the film, it kind of says that the point of life is living in a collective trust with your fellow man. The original tells a tale of how the collective can overcome an oppressor and live in harmony by accepting others, while the film is more about understanding each other, how acceptance can lead to harmony, and a bit about how there's nothing more war can fix. The authors of both works had a clear, similar message that they wanted to portray. Sins is closer to the latter idea, though I wouldn't say it promises that as an answer to everything. In fact, it's more about giving multiple answers to the same question, because most episodes are about Kashan meeting someone new, spending time with them, learning from the guest, and the guest learning from Kashan. Typically about understanding their specific way of life, a way that might clash with another guest character. It's a mix of the original series episode structure and the film's core ideas, an evolution of the Kashan storytelling methods. From the very start, it's clear that Sins is a different story. Moment 1, we have Luna and Kashan. This time, they're not friends or romantically involved, because immediately we see Kashan vows to kill Luna, and we have to learn from there. It's a striking introduction that lets us know that this is not any prior version of Kashan, as does one of the most kick-ass opening songs of all time. I didn't haven't mentioned music at all until now because, to be frank, it's not amazing in any iteration until Sins. New Human had a small number of loud heroic trumpet songs and a fine enough OP that fit the era, and Robot Hunter goes for an orchestral soundtrack that complements the character-to-character moments, but they're not amazing or anything. During my time editing this video, I've grown a greater appreciation for both, though I can't say that they even beat out other Tatsunoko soundtracks of their respective eras. And then the live-action adaptation had a dramatic score you'd expect from a live-action film, with a credits theme by Kirya's then-wife, Utada Hikaru, because I will never escape Kingdom Hearts. Sins upgraded the soundtrack quality immensely. With the god-tier OP and second ED, and the mysterious background music throughout the series. Sins is filled with very slow strings that give a horrifying thought about the unknown, and then will harshly switch to drums and horns during the big reveals or action scenes. I will admit, it's still maybe the weakest part of the series, but in a certain way I think that speaks more to the quality of the rest of the series. And partially I say that because of one major gripe I have with the soundtrack, but I'll talk about it when it's relevant to the story. Back on track, that first 15-second scene and the following intro set the stage for how this ain't your daddy's Kashan. Once it comes to a true start, we see that not even the setting is the same now. Beautifully drawn, desolate landscapes show that Sins is not in the modern era, fantasy world, or one based on a reality at all. It's a barren fantasy world, one where life is sparse and the biomes only connect loosely, where environments and architectures aren't based on what can practically exist, but what looks right in the current moment. Making it more enticing is the lack of detail to almost an impressionistic point that drives up the mystery aspect. It's a mystery about what led to this point, one we get to learn with Kashan. When Sins begins, Kashan has amnesia. No clue who he is, where he is, or what to do. A common cliche in anime, I know, but it's one I always like. Especially here where it's offset with a second character, a hooded, gruff-voiced robot that seems to know what's going on as he fills in the audience about it. He tells us where everyone lives now is a world descending into destruction. After Kashan killed Luna, something he doesn't recall because of amnesia, the entire world was plagued by what they call the Ruin. Plants, animals, humans, and robots alike are all able to die now. Some quickly, others at a normal human-like rate. Almost like everyone is living in a world taken over by that desert in the original show. While before Luna's death, the world prospered with eternal life. Or at least, that's what many others will tell Kashan. Now what makes this scene genius is who tells that to us, the audience. It's not a voiceless narrator, it's not a newly introduced character, it's that gruff guy we saw who's actually Breaking Boss, who in this iteration is voiced by the legendary Kenji Utsumi, the same person that voiced him in the original series and the OVA. And there's a reason that's important. Unlike American animation where replacing voice actors happens for a reason as simple as he looked at me funny, Japanese voice actors don't give up characters easily. If it happens, it's because the new iteration of a character is drastically different or the previous voice actor died. With Kashan, every iteration of the character has been the former, drastically different. As such, Kashan, Luna, the generals, and the few other returning characters are recast in each iteration. Plus, the large gaps between the three animations meant some of the actors left the industry. However, Kenji Utsumi as Breaking Boss is the only consistent voice between the three animated adaptations. So using him as the introduction to what is going on lets those familiar with the other incarnations have a sense of familiarity. Almost like this is someone they can trust, but an uneasy trust because they know this is the villain. While those not familiar with the old shows probably won't know that. Breaking Boss's name goes unspoken until episode 6, and he never introduces himself as Breaking Boss until episode 13. It's a nice touch for those who saw the previous works, who would likely feel the most confused by the dissonance between this and the previous animations. And if you are confused, that's fine, it's the intent. That puts you closer in line with Kashan's perspective. Kashan is an entity of questions. He knows just as much as we do after the opening, or even less since we heard Breaking Boss's monologue. Because of that, he can learn with us. First thing to learn, he's fucking powerful and immortal. If we power scaled this shit, Sins Kashan comes out on top. Nothing injures him, no one survives his attacks, and he can't even be touched unless he allows it. Once Kashan starts fighting, he's no longer a man, he's a force of nature that can't even control himself. I mentioned previously how his immortality never really got tested. The original doesn't go into it, the OVA has him maybe die after finding peace, and the film has him flat out die with a message I still don't quite understand. Neo-Human ends the series by laughing off his immortal suffrage with hope it may end, and the latter two let him die. Sins doesn't do those. Kashan is the only immortal in a world that used to have immortality. Humans and robots alike hate and envy Kashan for taking immortality away by his murder of Luna. What's more, a legend has circulated that by eating Kashan, you gain your immortality back. It's an empty, ridiculous legend that causes those most desperately clinging to life to attack Kashan. In Sins, Kashan's legend is not that of a hero that will save everyone. Kashan's cursed to be attacked by those desperate enough to believe such a tale. Episode 1 shows us and Kashan why that legend is harmful to not only himself, but those he comes in contact with. After the initial fight scene and a vague girl being vague, Episode 1 slows down. Kashan isolates himself to a nearby beach because as far as he knows, everyone wants him dead. It's clear to him that the world isn't safe for him, so why bother? It's then that a new core cast member, a robot child named Ringo, is intrigued by Kashan. As a robot rusting due to the ruin, she sees his perfect, unrusted body as beautiful, almost human-like, prompting her to befriend him, giving Kashan the knowledge that maybe not everyone antagonizes him. But Kashan can't even get close to those that don't hate him because a robot desiring Kashan's immortality promptly attacks Ringo when she starts walking away. Of course, Kashan saves her by brutally decimating the robot, but that doesn't make everything better. Ringo was attacked by a robot and saved by another powerful robot, making her afraid of Kashan now, running off to her caretaker Oji, who seems to know Kashan instead of staying near him. After they leave, the vague girl who's been tailing him, named Lius, shows up to catch him up to where we're at. He killed Luna, it caused the ruin, and she wants to kill him for a personal reason that Kashan doesn't remember, revealed in a later episode to be the death of her sister who cared for Luna. It all leaves Kashan with so many questions. Who is this woman? How did the ruin happen? Who is Luna? If he killed her, then why did he do it? And more importantly, what should he do right now? Lius basically sends Kashan to figure that out since he doesn't remember his sins and she doesn't want to kill an amnesiac. For the next 8 episodes, Kashan walks aimlessly. He has the general idea of finding answers to what I mentioned, but he's not in that big of a rush to do anything. He's an immortal amnesiac with no friends. He doesn't have any time limits or incentive to figure his shit out. So it's for these next few episodes where he spends time learning about the world, who inhabits it, what they do, and the remaining core cast drop in as well. Like Frender in the second episode. Now Frender is just a dog that Kashan met on his journey rather than being his lifelong companion. A drastic departure, and now that I think about it, episode 2, maybe I'm stretching here, feels to me like the ruined remains of the original series. After leaving Lius, Kashan finds himself in a quiet underground village populated by robots, all of whom are falling to the ruin. A sad fate the robots here have been living through by accepting that this is the way it is. Staying together through this makes them comfortable. It's the community's understanding of each other that makes them happy. Death will come to them, there's no way to stop it, and they have accepted it. That's what has made them alive. And similar to Neo-Human, it also has religious imagery from this rundown church. Here, the priest shows Kashan a litany of fallen robots and lets him know that in the Age of Ruin, they can't repair or make new robots. This church, a structure normally representative of faith, represents despair. A bit later, near the episode's end, a dying robot looking for Kashan shows up to fight. Obviously, he loses, but it makes the town realize who Kashan is, prompting yet another fight with Kashan in hopes of saving themselves, which obviously results in everyone's death, besides Frender, who stops the rampage. This final attack on Kashan feels to me like a reinterpretation of a middle Neo-Human episode. Back then, Kashan would go to a town in danger, introduce himself and offer assistance, while the town, aware of his heroic feats, would normally accept his help, and then he saves them with a message about banding together and fighting the flames of war. That's the basic gist of it. Here, Kashan swings by a random neighborhood, learns of their way of life, hides his identity because they know his legend, resents how he can't save them, has to fight back against them because he exists, and then there's a message about how a community that's banded together can fall apart due to the desperation that one small idea gives to the scared few. Am I reaching here? Yeah, probably. Either way, this and the following episode help to show off how Kashan is able to interact with society, the life form hierarchy, and technology's fallibility. At this point, it's important to re-examine the relationship between humans and robots. Back in Neo-Human, it was mostly just humans view robots as lesser beings because they're evil. A majority of them weren't sentient, and they don't die unless killed. It had the stories about smarter, good robots, but the mass-produced robots we see in a majority of episodes are pretty mindless. Sins re-examines this relationship. In the New World, humans are the minority population. Since humans need food, water, shelter, medicine, and all things you and I need to not die, the ruins environment isn't conducive to their lifestyle. Robots, while mortal, only need to worry about when the weather chips and rusts away at them. A slow process that could take months or decades for some of them, meaning robots have less to worry about than a human that can't go 3 days without liquids. And those ideas I just said is what episode 3 explores. It features a one-off human named Akos who teaches Kashan about humans and his own philosophy. Akos somewhat resents the human condition, but also he doesn't. He wants to have the sustainability of a robot while relishing the human feel and life he has. Akos is a walking contradiction. He does one thing at moment 1, while moment 2 he switches to something else. There's no goal in mind for him, he just has to go with the flow. It's a philosophy that sounds stupid at first, then somewhat smart, and then stupid again. I think we've all met someone like this. They don't present themselves too well, talks philosophically about some idea to give you an idea that they have it figured out, and then you realize they're just a bum. Akos is the bum, but he's the bum that inspires Kashan to move forward. As before, Leos wanted him to wallow in his sin, while Akos is telling him to forget about it and move on. Two contradictory ideals that Kashan is going to wrestle with for the rest of the series. He does at least start taking Akos' advice, leading to him to find Frender again, let bygones be bygones, and journey with the dog. As Kashan doesn't know his past well enough, he hasn't stripped it away, but he does decide that he'd rather find out what's next, with someone by his side. Since Kashan killed Frender's town, he's kind of in the same predicament. So Frender joins Kashan and takes roughly the same role from the other anime, except now he can't transform and he's willing to attack Kashan when he rampages. Kashan expects Akos to join the both of them for their journey, but instead he hides away for a bit. Now that he's fulfilled with passing off his mantra, he's okay with falling to the ruin. Akos has changed Kashan, and so Kashan has granted him his fulfillment. Now, episode 4 swaps roles between Kashan and the guest. This time, it's Kashan leaving a larger impact on the one-off character. This time, a warrior named Sophita, a woman who loves the thrill of battle. She's looking for the strongest, toughest fight possible, and Badashin from the original series isn't given that to her. And so, when she realizes Kashan's power, all she can think about is fighting him. Well, Kashan has no intention of fighting. Because while Sophita uses battle to express herself, Kashan hasn't had any good experience with it. Anytime he fights, he scares someone, murders, or just comes away feeling like a worse person. Unlike Sophita, who only feels passion in her life when said life is at stake. Eventually, Kashan gives in by letting her fight him, but he stops fighting back early. Instead, he just lets her penetrate the skinny twink in tight clothes. And it's here when she doesn't feel anything. At first, I thought it was just her disappointment that Kashan wouldn't fall over, but now I see it as more than that. Sophita is disgusted by his immortality. She's not feeling anything because she fears the idea of not being able to die, to lose the thrill she's found in battle. It's almost like she pities him but doesn't want to say it. This is the first time someone in Sins looks at Kashan and realizes how they might not want immortality. So I'm not going to go into scrutiny with every one-off episode. I need to leave something for you guys to experience, and these have a lot packed in them. I mean, I don't think there's any that I'd say repeat a core theme or message, and I'm still only scratching the surface with what I've said. And that's because the people that Kashan is meeting have different worldviews. No one repeats what someone else said because they're a different person. They have a different experience of what's going on. I mentioned before how Akos is more about letting things pass by. If something happens, you should let it be. Well, in a later episode, we have a character named Margot. He's a crippled robot painter living in a city-esque area. Unlike Akos, Margot is clinging to a past, one that he wishes to return to. A past where Breaking Boss and his forces ruled the world. He saw beauty in the world Breaking Boss brought, and he wants to recapture that order. His method? By painting over the whole town in the color of his choice. That way there's a consistent vision for the city. He's trying to recapture a long-gone magic, while Akos would just let it be. Trying to recapture the magic of the main villain of the series might make you think he's painted as wrong, when the episode itself doesn't do that. There's nothing spelling out if Margot is right or wrong. He's a man that made his choice, and it's what he lives. Okay, actually he dies at the end from the ruin, but it was his choice that he was content with. And that's what Sins does with most of its one-offs. Present their worldview, show how they choose to live with that, and lets you decide if you agree with them. I think it's amazing how well every episode can accomplish this without feeling stale or tripping over itself like the original. To tie the characters into the art direction, because, you know, it's a visual medium, the lighting and environments have a good way of indicating who's in control of a scene and how much clarity those characters have. For example, during the aimless period of the series, Kashan sees only a small amount of light. He's in death-filled churches, wide empty deserts, and white colorless towns. Kashan is purposeless and as such, doesn't yet perceive any beauty in the world. Us as a viewer can catch a glimpse of this at some points, like in Sophida's fight with Kashan and Ringo's initial meeting with him, but Kashan isn't seeing that. We as the viewer perceive a wonder with Ringo or Sophida, while Kashan doesn't. It's that wonder that gives people a reason to live. Something Kashan needs, since he has no choice but to live. There's two back-to-back episodes that give him that reason. They're the turning points of the series, and their use of color is amazing. In the first one, Kashan meets a songstress named Janica. Visually speaking, she's the brightest character we've seen so far. She has bright red hair, a deep white and green outfit, and fairly white skin. She is bright, and the scenes she controls are as well. In the middle, Kashan has philosophical debate with her because of course he does, and the lesson she wants to impart is that everything has meaning. Unlike Akko's, whose environment stayed similar when talking to Kashan, Janice's lights up when she imparts her worldview. It's the one that Kashan is actually trying to cling on to. Her worldview is clicking with him. Janice has given Kashan some hope with her words, inspiring him to fight off rogue androids when they attempt to stop her singing, which itself gives hope to many of the other robots and humans alike. Very comparable to that episode in the original show that I had talked about earlier. Speaking of that scene, a quick, very big gripe. Janice sings a song in this episode. It's okay for a song to be played one time. Not the worst song I've heard in an anime, but it's not one that I'm gonna come back to. In the later part of Sins, they replay this song a lot. And I don't have an issue with an insert song being played a few times. The problem is that it doesn't match the scenes they put it in. It brings down the OST in my mind by a lot, to be honest. Which I hate saying that because the singer, Nami Miyahara, was actually featured in a song called Dreaming in Free Tempo's album called Sounds. An underrated album I consider basically perfect, please go listen to it. Anyways, Kashan is getting the idea that he should actually find a reason to live instead of hearing about others' reasons. And with the following episode, he finds that. In this episode, Kashan meets a girl named Nico. Nico used to care for Luna until Kashan yeeked her. After those events leading to today, the ruin has made her mentally handicapped. She has little idea about what's going on right now and spends her days caring for a fake Luna she made herself while playing with a bunch of flowers. Nico doesn't really have any bad in her. Even when Kashan and the robot Kashan was fighting fall down there, she tends to their wounds as well. It's also shown in the art because this is the brightest episode so far. While there's still rusted metal around, Nico's little play area is covered in bright white, green, and yellow flowers. It represents how Nico is ignorant to the problems outside, maybe due to her faith in Luna. A faith she rubs off on Kashan, Ringo, Liu, Soji, and even the dumb Mook robot. A belief so powerful that for the remainder of the series, Kashan has decided that the real Luna is alive, able to give immortality back, and he will find her. And what's strange about it is that the world totally shifts to adhere to this belief. Beforehand, any mention of Luna was about her death. No one said she was alive, and no one believed she was. It was an agreed upon fact that she was dead until Kashan has pretty much decided she's not. Maybe we can compare it to Jesus and his second coming. It's agreed upon by most people that she existed and died. The powers she had are questioned, and some think that she is already back. With that idea in mind, we can say that Kashan and Frender are beginning a religious pilgrimage to find Luna to restore everyone's immortality. And on that journey, they meet so many other people on the same trek. Kashan has seen the light, and now he's meeting everyone else that have noticed it too. And I think what's most interesting is that a closing scene in one episode flat out shows us Luna is alive, no question about it. As soon as Kashan has faith in Luna living, so do we. You know, except the faith-based part is gone since we have evidence. Anyway, this second third of the series is when they slow down on one-off characters and explore the main cast more. Their backstories and motivations were touched on a bit before the second part of the series, but no point in me saying it twice, we'll just talk about it now. Besides Kashan and Frender, there's Lius, Oji, and Ringo on Kashan's side, Breaking Boss on his own, and two robots looking similar to Kashan. One named Lita that's recruiting an army of robots she promised a salvation she can't give, and Dio, Kashan's rival. Let's talk about Dio more, because I like him. One of the more important character archetypes that evolved since the original Kashan series is the rival. Vegeta, Shadow, Kaiba, my grandson, Dick Brain. Everyone knows these character types. They challenge the hero, believe themselves superior, and usually have similar moves to mirror their protagonist. A rival isn't normally a villain of a story. They have their own motives that just typically don't align with the hero, but they don't have to be bad. Dio is no more evil than the guy that killed their goddess and made everyone mortal. Dio's formally introduced in episode 6. He has the same clothes, body shape, and hat as Kashan in black, with a slightly bigger broken horn on his head. A pure black version of the pure white character. Not original, but like a lot of rivals, it gives us the indicator of his connection to Kashan. This tells us, the audience, that these two were more likely than anything built by the same scientist. A scientist that had actually sent both Kashan and Dio to kill Luna. And since Kashan killed her and Dio didn't, Dio resents both Kashan and Luna, earning this feeling that he has something to prove. For that reason, he tells the robotic masses that he can stop the ruin, return the world to the glory when Breaking Boss was in charge, and he swears to Kashan that he'll beat him. The later, we already know is impossible. The key difference between Dio and Kashan is that Dio is neither immortal or an amnesiac. Dio's got the same strength as Kashan, but if you rip him in half, he's dead, presenting an irreconcilable difference between his goal of beating Kashan and Kashan's inability to die. Kashan even wants Dio to win. He tries to let him kill him 3 different times in the series, but physically can't. Dio is a power that should be able to fulfill his dream in any other instance, while Kashan is the immovable boulder he's come against. Dio's got a classic Vegeta syndrome going on. He's doomed to fail, while in any other instance, he'd win. He can work as hard as he wants, scheme as smart as he wants, but we know he can't beat Kashan. Even with Vegeta, there was the slight idea that maybe it could happen, but it was his ill intentions for a majority of the series and misguided attempts to simulate Super Saiyan Plot Armor Goku that made us know he couldn't beat him. Dio was created to simulate Kashan, but is worse without immortality. And as robots with a hardwired peak performance and an expiration date they can't extend, it's scientifically impossible for Dio to get any better. He's going to suffer the ruin while Kashan stays at peak performance. His creators didn't make him capable of beating Kashan. Speaking of his creators, most of the lead cast is slowly revealing their backstories up until episode 13, while they're kinda hard stops to just finish it up. I pinpoint 13 as the hard stop because that's when Breaking Boss finally makes himself a main character again, revealing to everyone that he and OG created Kashan, Dio, and Lita for 2 reasons. 1, to kill Luna, and 2, so that robots can reproduce. The one thing that humans have above robots, which is something I find interesting at this point. As I said before, in the original show, humans were considered better than robots. Just across the board, that's what everyone thought. Well, here in Sins, robots are winning in most aspects against humans. Not that they're actually fighting, but they are trying to survive against each other. But even despite that, robots still have something they yearn for that humans have, which is why OG and Breaking Boss made 3 robots that are somewhere between robot and human. Having Breaking Boss force these revelations also feels like a giant wake up from the perspective of someone watching the whole franchise in succession. As Breaking Boss is the only character portrayed the same between iterations, it's that familiarity that reminds me, oh shit, this is a Kashan series. Especially when you remember, he's the only one with the same backstory ruling the world at some time in the past. For all intents and purposes, Breaking Boss is the same person we saw in the original series. So having him connect the backstories to the present feels like a plea to get on with the story from someone who already knows how things will play out. And I think Breaking Boss knows that means Kashan will win. Breaking Boss is trying to wake up the hero within Kashan. Perhaps you could say the human hero in Kashan. What we've just learned is that Kashan in Sins is nothing like the Tetsuya Kashan in prior iterations. Kashan was built as a robot by Breaking Boss with no connection to any kind of Dr. Azuma, unless Dr. Azuma still created Breaking Boss, which is not something the series goes into. This means that Kashan in Sins never had a memory of human emotion. Any humanity he exposes is something he found throughout his journey, creating a distinction between him and the original. Kashan in Neo-Human grasps to maintain his humanity, while Kashan in Sins is searching to find it. Push forward a bit more in the following episode where Lita sends Dio's forces to attack a group of pilgrims going towards Luna. It's a situation Kashan doesn't initially want anything to do with because he's kind of sad about shit, but just some emo sad posting with Breaking Boss and he goes to fight Dio again, where he actually tries this time. Speaking of, action in Sins is something that kinda just happens in a lot of episodes. He fights Frender, Dio, Safita, and a few others with meaning, but in more early episodes, Sins is similar to the original 70s show. We have weekly episodes and it needs a fight scene. I won't say Sins ever really shakes off that notion. In fact, there's some episodes where it rushes through a fight scene to start the story. However, I feel as though the later half recontextualizes the less engaging fights for us. In the early half of the series, Kashan fought out of guilt or pure survival. Kashan never initiated a fight, and because of his weird survival mechanism, if someone attacked him, he had a hard time stopping himself. Kashan only engaged in battles to save those most impacted by his presence or impacted by his murder of Luna. For example, he saves Nico at one point, who became damaged after Luna's death, and Ringo, who was only attacked with Kashan near her. Kashan was righting his sins by directly saving those he harmed. Well, after his second fight with Dio to save the town, he changes that perspective. Kashan realized how his power can save people. There's an antagonizing force with Dio and Lita causing problems towards innocents. If Kashan doesn't save them, then who will? That realization to use his power to save those weaker than himself is how he starts living with himself, and also earn Lius's forgiveness, who from this point joins his party in the search for Luna. Since Kashan wants to use his power to save those weaker than him, that also means save those dying from the ruin, including friends like Lius and Ringo, giving him more incentive to find Luna fast. Because if he doesn't, the friends and communities he's met along the way won't survive. Now, if I can pause to talk about animation for a moment, they show off Kashan's beauty and the animator's skill very well. Kashan technically doesn't perform many maneuvers dissimilar to those in the original series. He jumps high in the air, kicks, karate chops. The martial arts 101 book he read is the same volume. Sins, obviously due to decades of animation development and skilled creatives from DBZ and Saint Seiya, takes a giant step above what the original series could do. For one, Kashan is going a lot faster in every battle, a feeling they help find by moving the camera and even skipping a few frames. One example I find absolutely insane, he's fighting Frender. Frender's hurt his hand, and this is how it looks. Such a cool little twitch I love. Close zooms while he's, spinning mid-jump and all that also helps to show the elegant form of his body. Something that his simplistic design and the straight paths of most of his attacks help with. Even when he's doing something simplistic, Sins isn't afraid to warp Kashan's body to even longer degrees than his initial form. At times, it almost feels as though he's reaching out of the screen. Maybe the best way to put it is that it's a shonen action scene with shoujo romance designs. Beautiful ballet dancers punching each other's faces in. A reality conflicting with the presentation of it passed on to us. It makes the fight's visual identity stand out amongst most anime that I've seen, especially when it first came out. That was around the era when anime started leaning away from the highly detailed, edgy look popular in the 90s and back to the more simplistic designs we see in anime now. I'm not saying Sins was the trendsetter on that, that was K-On!, but it is interesting to note. Moving back on track, now that Kashan knows his story and brought Lius on the journey with him, it directs the character's focus towards Lius and Ringo. Both of them go through some of the same things Kashan learned, but in a strikingly different way when talking about animation and visual elements. For Lius, she's accepting that she needs to live in the now rather than cling to the past of her sister. Enacting revenge on Kashan, who is barely even the same man that killed her sister, is only going to make her miserable. And with the ruin catching up to her, she doesn't have a lot of time left to be miserable. Ever since episode 1, she's struggled with seeing less and less reason to fight Kashan. She's even fought with him in many episodes now. There's no more reason for revenge in her head, they're just friends. Episode 18 is the harshest stop in the series to go full mindfuck mode. It's on the scale of the final 2 episodes of Evangelion. A full introspective of her mind, the breaking of her preconceived notions, glimpses at her fear of the ruin, and the acceptance that she loves Kashan. All told, in dream scenarios, scenarios she has conjured, like a childhood she would not have had as a robot, and a weird trip to New York City, which she would have never seen. It's representative of her desire to live the human life. A childhood, basketball, sex, all human acts she never experienced as a robot thinking she was immortal. This gives her entire character and motivations a complete 180 before the final act. Instead of desiring to kill Kashan to avenge her sister, she wants to live with Kashan, and Kashan wants to live with her too. Ringo gets an opposite story. Something they subtly hint and eventually explain that I've ignored is how Ringo is the only being born after the ruin. We're never sure if she's human or robot because at one moment she's rusting because of the ruin, and there's another scene where she's bleeding from a cut. Ringo is a mystery, one that's never really detailed. Minor implications and putting 2 and 2 together imply that Lita was her mom due to this quick scene of Lita preggert and OG finding baby Ringo in a fucking dumpster. I think I'm gonna follow that belief, but again, it's up to your own interpretation. It's left very vague. Assuming Ringo doesn't die as a child from the rust, she may be the hope the world is looking for to bring life back into it. As the only entity born during the ruin, she doesn't yearn for the times long past. Ringo sees the beauty of the ruin better than anyone since she has no memory of the past or sins of it like Kashan is told. Ringo and Lius's motivations and Kashan's desire to fulfill them are the main reasons he wants to find Luna and restore immortality. He's no longer looking for a general immortality for the whole community, but his own personal group. Kashan is searching for a personal happiness that happens to involve the happiness of others. So if the first part of Sins is meant to portray an aimless feeling and the second part is about finding faith, then the third one is about losing that faith, realizing that what you believed in wasn't what you thought, killing God if you would. Once the party reaches Luna, they find that the immortality she gives isn't all it's chalked up to be. After waiting in a long line for hours upon hours to receive immortality, the cast finds that anyone who's accepted Luna's salvation has become idiotic. They're relishing too much in their immortality by totally decimating their bodies with dumb stunts, fighting in what you'd expect of a child given GTA or something. Self-serving actions that will harm everyone, including those that might not have been saved. Only Dune, a major recurring character I didn't go over, isn't affected by the madness. In fact, he's doing better than when we last saw him, and that's because he didn't take Luna's immortality. He instead chose to live with what he has, and that's made him feel renewed. Dune is accepting that he wants to live the life he's given, an idea that many of these robots don't want to accept, and especially not Luna. Luna in Sins has next to no relation to the old one. Instead, she is the embodiment of thanatophobia. Anything coming close to death, she gets rid of. Even if it's just a wilted flower, she requests someone hide it. Finds a dying robot, she heals it. Luna doesn't want to think, see, or hear about death unless it's how she can prevent it. Despite Luna's ability to grant immortality, she is weak. Luna's just as afraid as anyone else, and that fear of death is bleeding onto those she saves in a twisted way. Because of her actions, Kashan's party gets turned off to the idea of immortality and decides to skip out on it. It's clear to them that living without death will put them back to Kashan's previous aimless state, and so the main cast gives up their faith. If we're to continue the religious comparisons, it's like when someone realizes that they belong to a corrupt church and leave to start their own, join a different one, or in the main cast case, they just become atheist. Meaning at this point, everyone's kind of got their stuff figured out. Kashan and Frender plan to just go live with OG, Ringo, and Lius until the ruin takes them. But before that, Dio comes in to finish his character arc. Kinda. Like I said, by the definition of his robotic creation, Dio cannot finish his goal of defeating Kashan, a fact that Dio is struggling with. Sins even takes a bit from the feature film in that there's some episodes solely meant to make us side with Dio more. See the two sides of the conflict. After all, his goal is only to save robots and defeat the guy that doomed them all. Sure, he has a more self-serving reason for it, but the core idea does help everyone. I don't even want to call Dio evil since that doesn't quite feel like the right word to call him. He's really just horse-blinded by his single impossible goal of beating Kashan. And if you twist the narrative a little bit, he kinda does. In the final battle between Kashan and Dio, Kashan realizes that Dio will never die happy without beating him. Dio lives through fighting just like Safida had before. And it's through his final battle with Dio where Kashan figures out that he too lives through fighting. As the one person that can't die, he has to fight. If Kashan won't do it, who will? Which leads to something I've seen a lot of people disagree with. At the very end, Dio punches Kashan pretty hard and decides that he won. Neither of them pass out or fall to the ground. They both stand still with a fist at the gut, deciding that's it. So obviously, Dio didn't win the physical fight. Kashan lives, and not long later, Dio dies to the ruin with Lita. But Dio did what any good rival should, improve Kashan. Not by his fighting skill or power, but his outlook of fighting. I said before that Kashan switched to only fighting when it's to protect someone. You could say that in that moment he became more in line with the original Kashan. Dio clearly wasn't a fan of that. He wanted Kashan to fight for himself. To be specific, fight Dio for himself. And getting Kashan to turn over to that side is how Dio wins here. There's a lot of rival characters where when you first see them, they're better than the protagonist. When we first hear of Vegeta, he is way stronger than Goku. Shadow makes Sonic look like a wimp when he shows up, and let's not even get into Virgil. Dio wasn't like that. Every time he showed up, we knew Kashan would beat him. Like I said, Dio is by definition less powerful than Kashan. But the better aspect he had this whole time was memory. Memory that gave him a purpose, something Kashan lacked. And after losing his faith, Kashan might have lost the purpose he found. So Dio instilling this new philosophy into Kashan is how he wins, spreading his message, similar to Akos early in the series. Again, after that fight, Kashan leaves to live a happy life with his party. That isn't really the ending of Sins though. After the Dio fight and after the Luna pilgrimage, there's one more episode. While everything was going on, Breaking Boss had his own background story. He went around to meet many of the robots he failed by losing his robotic empire. Breaking Boss, the main villain of the prior iterations, regrets his failure to maintain a robot empire. Not because he lost power, but because it led to the death of so many robots under his command. Something he doesn't allow himself to forget by making graves for every single one of them. Breaking Boss inadvertently created the ruin by sending out Kashan and wants to balance that out by bringing robots to Luna for salvation, something Kashan isn't too big a fan of. Once Oji and Luz finish off their lifespans, he ditches Frender and Ringo to find Luna and Breaking Boss one last time. After losing faith in salvation, finding the will to fight, and hearing so many people's stories, he's gonna do the real thing only Kashan can do: keep death from ever dying. In this final episode, he's an absolute force of nature. After his personal community died, besides Ringo and Frender, he realized that there's no emotion if everyone goes on forever. No incentive to do anything. No incentive to live life. So Kashan fucked some shit up here. Like one of the most powerful moments we've ever seen him. And the very last fight of the series, I'm actually thankful for this, is against Breaking Boss himself. But it's weirder than their past fights. They don't have much animosity towards each other. It's like Breaking Boss knows he's gonna lose and kind of accepts that. However, he still gives it his all against Kashan, even putting on that classic hat. Like I've mentioned how much of Breaking Boss's scenes are winks and nods at old-time fans, and this is maybe the biggest one. Sins ends with two very quick, very conflicting scenes. First, Kashan walks in to tell Luna that he's going to do the one thing only he can do. If Luna makes everyone immortal, Kashan is going to bring back the ruin and start killing people. However, he understands to have a balance. An underlying message in Sins was about understanding the conflicting needs of everyone. Kashan didn't want to fight, but Dio did. Akos thinks he should move on from the past, while Margo wants to recapture it. Not everyone has the same needs. Forcing needs and ideals on someone else isn't helpful to everyone. And because of that, Kashan tells Luna she can grant immortality to those who want it, but if she does it too much, he may just kill her again. Thankfully, it seems like he never had to do that. Final few shots take place a few years later with a teenage Ringo living her life on the beach with Frender, stating that Kashan never came back. Kashan did the one thing no one wanted to do: become a Grim Reaper that everyone fears. Well, you can say Ringo represents the life that can keep going. Her existence, not in any kind of leadership position, is representative of the ruined world moving back towards a balanced position, not filled with immortality during Luna's reign or death afterwards. There's hope that the world may have a brighter future. Personally, I think Sins has the best ending of the series. I've seen some argue that a few bits, including a few I didn't mention, don't make sense, but I think that misses the point of the series. Sins, like all of Kashan, is still a fantasy anime, a genre where everything has a certain layer of interpretation, but also, Sins' cast is almost entirely comprised of robots, walking and talking literal beings, entities whose nature conflict with the fantasy element. So when something more fantasy-like happens, it might be a little tough to accept that a robot did it. I've also seen people complain about the dialogue and pacing, which, yeah, that's fair. I like the slow build-up because I think it makes the payoff better, but it goes slow. However, someone who just watched all of the original, OVA, and film, I think that works in its favor. I hadn't watched Sins since around 2010 or 2011 when it was fairly recent, so I wanted to pick apart the similarities and differences between the original, which, as we saw, is almost entirely different characters with similar messages. Messages that amalgamate the prior iterations together and take them further to say something unique from them. Casshern Sins isn't for everyone, but man, it hits the small niche I land in. Philosophical debate, crazy fight scenes, and interpretive visual aesthetic unique to itself. Everything I'm looking for. And as someone who's gone through some tough times in the past year and a half, every iteration of Kashan's messages has kinda helped me. Things can be tough, but you gotta make do with what you're given. Live life to the fullest and maybe just laugh it off. I really hope that more people can watch Kashan and see what they come out of with it. Since Sins ended in 2009, there hasn't been any major Casshern projects. With how Sins ended, it's clear they can't continue from that narrative, and to be honest, I don't think a reboot can improve on Sins. It's everything the creators wanted it to be, and if Tatsunoko is gonna go back to any of their classic franchises for reinvention, I think there's other characters in more need than Kashan. Like, you would not believe how badly I want a modern 2D Speed Racer anime. Anyways, since Sins, Tatsunoko has done pretty well for themselves. They're still a publicly traded company, but there's more shareholders in the creative media realm than the toy business. As of today, Nippon NTV has a 54% stock in it, idol agency Hori Pro holds 13%, and Production IG, a former Tatsunoko subsidiary, has 11%, while the remaining 20% is still owned by Takata. How this has shaken up the company isn't something I'm too in the know about because I set some limits on which years to research, but it's clear that Tatsunoko is doing better than the early 2000s. If you look at Tatsunoko's work in the past decade, I think some of you would be surprised about what popular anime they did. For example, Psycho Pass and Ping Pong are big ones, and they also revitalized classic IPs again like Gatchaman, Yatterman, and Time Bokan. For Kashan himself, he's about the same as he was after his initial show, a key part of Tatsunoko's heroes that appears in cameos and such. Probably most known with my audience, his 70s depiction was playable in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom with Frender helping him. While making this video, I got back into playing TVC, and I can say I enjoy using him. Not because he's that good, he's probably in the middle of the tier list. I just enjoy pointing at the screen and shouting, "Oh, I know what he did that!" More recently, Kashan got a place on the roster in the manga and anime Infinity Force, a crossover of Tatsunoko's superheroes that I haven't watched yet. Although one I have seen is a bit more obscure. It's an OVA called Pandora and Akubi, which is a massive Tatsunoko love letter featuring characters from both their heroic and comedic sides. Episode 1 has Breaking Boss and his generals as the main villains, though Kenji Itsumi had already passed away by the time it came out, so sadly he didn't get to voice Breaking Boss. And obviously there's tons of other large Tatsunoko crossovers that'll have Kashan in a minor role. With that said, I think what's lasted most with Kashan is his impact on other creators. A tragic robot resenting his existence is a character dynamic not seen much back then. Plus he had such a sleek design. One example, Mega Man took a lot of inspiration from the series, including Rock's design, but that was an amalgamation of 70s Japanese heroes that Kashan just happened to be a part of. Personality wise, I'd say Kashan has more in common with X, to be honest. Both resent something about the life they're left to live, but fight forth for another day. I can also see some similarities between Sigma and Breaking Boss, a robot with a positive purpose in life, but switched gears because of an incident outside their control. I'd say the most obvious comparison is Frender inspiring Rush. Like, even his transformations, a drill, jet, and submarine, is just like Frender. Only thing keeping them apart is how Rush looks very cartoony in every appearance, while Frender has the serious Greyhound look. Platinum Games would also take inspiration from Kashan. One of the key founders, Shinji Mikami, has been upfront with how he took inspiration for Kashan with Vanquish. In fact, he said that if he hadn't already made God Hand a punch-and-kick action game right before it, he would have borrowed even more from Kashan, which I just think is kind of funny. Anyways, I hope that all of this has given you a better appreciation for the creatives innovating back in the early days of anime, and maybe convinced you to check out the whole Kashan franchise. I know a lot of people might want to just jump right into Sins, but I believe that watching the original series can give you a better appreciation for it, so I really recommend you do that. And if 35 episodes of a 70s anime is too much for you, then the OVA does a fine enough job at giving you an idea of what the original show was like. I can't say it replaces the original, but if you want to watch Sins, then I really think you need at least one show that gives you an idea of what the original world was like. And that original world was a wonderful robot fantasy story taking what we'd seen before to make a journey no one else had. Captured something no other anime had at the time. After all, if Kashan can't do it, then who will?